Welcome into the 2024 Daily Faceoff Live Free Agent Special. I'm Tyler Yaremchuk. We are streaming live on the Daily Faceoff YouTube, and we're going to be going commercial-free for the next 3 hours, giving you everything you need to stay up to date here on signing day in the NHL, as free agency has or is about an hour away from officially kicking off. But with the number of moves we've already seen today and last night, it kind of feels like things have gotten going a little bit early. Welcome into the show. We have a lot that we'll be getting to in the next 3 hours. We have a panel out east with our friends Brent Wallace from Coming In Hot, Arpon Basu from The Athletic, and Nick Alberga from Leafs Morning Take. Out west, we'll be joined by Ryan Pike from FlamesNation and Ken Wiebe from the Winnipeg Free Press. We got our main panel with Colby Cohen and Carter Hutton, a couple of former NHLers, and I may have buried the lead, but we also have our daily Faceoff hockey insider, Frank Seravalli, who will be joining us throughout the show, breaking news as it happens, and it's the return of our ever-popular Insider Cam up in the top right corner. I will give you a look at that in just a couple of minutes, but first, let me welcome in our daily Faceoff hockey insider, Frank Seravalli. Frank, coming to us from a fresh new studio, getting ready to break some fresh new signings. I'd imagine you haven't slept a lot over the last 12 to 24 hours, but that's because news is happening.
Yeah, it's been an endless supply of news so far this morning, and a whole bunch of deals that are set to come out just after free agency opens officially at 12 noon Eastern time. But Tyler, let's talk what's already happened to this point. The biggest money deal of the day, the biggest money deal of free agency. The Tampa Bay Lightning trading for Jake Guentzel's rights on Sunday. They hammer out a 7-year, $63 million contract with Jake Guentzel, 7 times 9. And this is a massive deal that has $53 million of it payable in signing bonus over those 7 years. So the Lightning go out and get their guy. I think the big question after that is what happens next with Steven Stamkos, and we'll get to that in a minute. But some other big name stuff that happened. The number one pending free agent available was off the board last night as well, just before midnight, coming down to the wire. The Florida Panthers, the Stanley Cup champions, bring back 59-goal scorer Sam Reinhart, and you look at the deal that he signed, 8 times $8.625 million. It's a massive win for the Panthers to get him sub $9 million. And it's a massive win for Sam Reinhart in a no-tax state in Florida. So the two teams in Florida getting very important pieces of business done, leaving Stamkos as our number one free agent on our top 75. And there's a number of teams interested. I'm told the Nashville Predators have been one of the front runners the entire time for Steven Stamkos should he make it to market. I can't close the door just yet on Stamkos and Tampa Bay. Keep an eye on the New Jersey Devils. the Vegas Golden Knights, the Detroit Red Wings, and perhaps a couple other teams lurking in the weeds to try and pitch Steven Stamkos on this Monday, Canada Day, as we get set for free agency now less than 1 hour from now. Steven Stamkos potentially on the move, and you look at so many other big pieces and big names. There's a lot happening and none bigger than Stamkos.
Yeah, he is number one on your board, and for good reason. If he does end up leaving Tampa Bay next season, it will be one of those weird things of like, whoa, Stamkos in another jersey. It's like Jordan on the Wizards, Modano on the Red Wings, but a little bit different because he's still got a lot of gas in the tank, Frank. This is a guy who's not just going to kick his feet up, sign a ticket somewhere, and score 20 goals a season. He's still an impact player, 40 goals.
Yeah, and that's really the tough part, I think, that the Stamkos camp has had to reckon with. This isn't a player looking for a retirement deal that's looking to ride off into the sunset after delivering 2 Stanley Cups as a Mount Rushmore player and captain for the Lightning. And I think if the Lightning somehow do end up letting Steven Stamkos walk, I think it's going to be a miscalculation on the part of Julien Brisebois, not just how much game Stamkos has left, but also what he means to that team, the city, the fan base, and also the guys in that locker room. That would be a tremendous loss. And I don't know that that's properly been reckoned with, but I think when you get to this point, you're pushed, as Stamkos has been, with what they believe are a few insulting offers, and the Lightning not moving on top of not offering him a contract at all last summer. There's been tons of friction there throughout the year that's made it a bit difficult for Stamkos, I think, to wrap his head around. Let's talk about a couple other things that have also gotten done this morning. The Toronto Maple Leafs signing defenseman Chris Tanev before the market opens. They traded for his rights on Saturday with the Dallas Stars. It's a long-term deal for Chris Tanev. Not sure anyone really saw that coming as of a week ago. A 6-year deal carrying a $4.5 million cap hit. The Toronto Maple Leafs also getting done an extension with Joe Woll, 3 years times $3.66 million. I believe they are also in line to sign goaltender Anthony Stolarz, 6'6" netminder, who helped back up Sergei Bobrovsky this year with the Cup champ Florida Panthers. So look for Stolarz to land in Toronto to complete that tandem. And we should talk goalie market as a whole, too. It's going to be fascinating to see what the annual game of goaltending musical chairs looks like. Reported just a few minutes ago that Eric Comrie is expected to land back in Winnipeg for a perhaps 4th stint. But where is Connor Hellebuck's tandem mate from last year in Lauren Brossoit going? I'm told that he was looking for a 3 to 4 year deal in the $3 to $4 million range per season. So I don't know, just looking at the goalie market, how many teams can actually afford to get a deal like that done for their 1B guy? So it's going to be interesting to see what happens there and where all of these sort of number 2 goalies end up landing. And I don't know, there's a lot in the hopper this morning, Tyler.
Well, and there's going to be a lot of things that surprise people in terms of the term that's thrown out, money that's thrown out. There are teams who appear ready to spend like drunken sailors, Frank, but maybe who or where are a couple of spots you're looking at and going, hey, this team is going to surprise people with how aggressive they spend.
Yeah, I'll give you 2. I'm going to give you the Chicago Blackhawks, and it's already been reported this morning some of the names that the Blackhawks are eyeing up, including Tyler Bertuzzi and Alec Martinez. What about the Anaheim Ducks, another team that's got a pile of money to spend just to get to the salary cap floor? I'm told they're one of the teams that's in line to pitch Steven Stamkos should they be given the opportunity. I don't think he's ready for that at this point in his career, but I'm told the Anaheim Ducks are another team that's been trying to target Jonathan Marchessault as well. You look at Anaheim, Pat Verbeek, their GM, has been very clear in the last 24 to 48 hours. I'm looking for a top 6 forward and a top 4 defenseman to add to their team. Those would be some big ticket items for the Ducks. So keep an eye on 2 teams that have been in the rebuilding phase that are looking to spend to take the next step forward in Anaheim and Chicago. And I can also tell you a couple teams that aren't going to be active at all today. One is going to be the Philadelphia Flyers. They re-signed defenseman Eric Johnson, a 1-year, $2 million deal in that range to stay in Philly. But that's it. Not expecting them to be involved in much else. Same thing with the Montreal Canadiens, another team that I think had kind of monitored the market. I reported yesterday Patrick Kane was one name that they were interested in talking with before he ended up re-signing with the Detroit Red Wings. The Montreal Canadiens also monitored the Jonathan Marchessault sweepstakes, but I believe at this point they're a team that won't be in the mix for Marchessault. So after trading Jonathan Kovacevic on Sunday to the New Jersey Devils in exchange for a 4th-round pick, I don't expect the Montreal Canadiens to be a day one player in free agency. So a couple teams are kind of capped out and not doing much. Some teams are going to be in the middle, and some teams are going to be big spenders that cannot help themselves to open free agency.
And while some fans may be disappointed to hear that their teams are not in the mix on a lot of big stuff here on July 1, sometimes you thank yourself for just staying out of the mix in a couple of years when you're not strapped with a bunch of buyouts.
Well, that's exactly the play. And you're going to see some teams. I'll give you another example, the Calgary Flames. They will sign a couple free agents on this day, but they're not committing much in term or dollars to be able to do so. So Montreal, Calgary, Philadelphia, pick some other teams that are in the mix. They don't want to be signing players that are going to be getting in the way of some of the young guys that they have on the rise. Chicago, a bit of a different story. They had a roster to fill out. The Anaheim Ducks, they're looking for increased veteran leadership. So teams are in different phases in terms of their build, and you're going to see the result, but no one really wants to get stuck with some term and dollars that they might end up regretting in a big way later on.
All right, Frank, you have news to break. There is a lot going on. We are going to send Frank up to his ever-popular Insider Cam. And before I get to our main panel, I need to let you know that today's show is brought to you by Bet365, the largest sports betting platform globally. And you can sign up today using the promo code DAILY365 to get in on a huge range of markets. Get in on a huge range of markets, whatever's the sport, whatever the moment, it is never ordinary at Bet365. Let's bring in our main panel, a couple of former NHLers in Colby, Cohen and Carter Hutton. And Carter joining us with a nice, beautiful wood panel background. It's Canada Day up north, and no one is embodying that more than our pal Carter Hutton. I love the cabin look, Huts.
Yeah, well, I figured you guys got the brick. I needed to break it up with a little bit of wood here, the cabin. And honestly, I've been through free agency a lot of times up at this cabin. And so this is kind of rare being on the other side of it now, getting to call some shots and see it break down. And usually by this point in the day in my free agency, I either had it settled or I was sitting, waiting, hoping to get a job. So I've been through it all and just glad to be on and glad to be part of it.
Colby,
and I think
started today by saying, "What's Canada Day?" But anyways, welcome to the show, Cole.
I did not say what's Canada Day. Do not start fights with me with our Canadian listeners. I'm a big fan. I talked about on your show all season how I just love "Oh Canada" as a song. So what better day to be thinking about the song "Oh Canada" than Canada Day? But look, always a fun day to be a part of. This free agent frenzy special. You have to remember these guys are all human beings, a lot of them in different situations in their career. I have close friends who have been on the side of this where they were the number one free agent signing the biggest ticket. They're now sitting there waiting for the phone to ring, hoping an option comes along in the later stages of their career. So with all the information coming out, it seems like there's a lot of stuff contradictory. And I can tell you this, if you want accurate information, wait to hear it from Frank. He's not a guy that teases things. He goes once it's hard news. So I have a feeling we'll be probably, left speechless a couple of times throughout the day. So excited to see where noon takes us.
Let's start at the top of Frank's top 75 list, and that would be Steven Stamkos. It sounds like there is a legitimate chance he is a former member of the Tampa Bay Lightning, and he moves on to a new spot. Carter, what do you make of the way this is all played out? And I know we're hearing a lot of rumblings about the Nashville Predators. Is there another spot that maybe you think would be a decent fit for Stamkos?
For Stamkos, obviously, I like the fact that he ends up in Nashville. It's crazy how the tables have turned in Nashville, in my opinion. You look earlier in the year where they talk about moving Saros, right? Moving on from him and Askarov coming up. And then all of a sudden now you sign Saros. They have a playoff run. And Stamkos has that potential to go there and be a fit where he can help on, especially McDonough's gone now, bringing that veteran leadership. And I think something for the Preds that they value, especially when it comes to Barry Trotz and the long line of David Poile, is the veteran leadership where he can come in there and help out. He's been a winner. And I think something that, I probably rub Stamkos the same way. And I think Jake Getzel is going to have a lot of weight on his shoulders going into Tampa Bay. not just on the rink, in the dressing room, right? This is a guy that is a leader and someone who leads their team. So I don't mind him going to Nashville. I think it will be awesome. But for Stamkos, he's got to do now, like at this point in his career, I think he's got to find the right fit for him and his family, and especially a guy who I don't think any of us really saw him not wearing a Lightning jersey. You know, let's say it's not done yet, but I think Nashville would be a great fit for a team that, you know, could use him.
Colby, what do you make of the Stamkos situation?
You know what? I actually think back to conversations we had on, you know, Morning Cup of Hockey and Daily Faceoff Live about this situation during, you know, the trade deadline. And I said multiple times that I thought that the Tampa Bay Lightning were closer to a rebuild than another Stanley Cup. I really did. Now, they clearly don't feel that way with the decisions that they continue to make, but, you know, Steven Stamkos could have gotten you a major haul. And if you thought there was any chance that this could have happened, you know, this is why you can't really fall in love with a player, because, you know, you leave the door open for a disappointing July 1. And I think this was a major miss by Julien Brisebois. And I don't say that often. This is a guy who has earned the right to do things that we may not agree with, but we have to say, you know what, this guy generally hits the right notes when it comes to it. So this is a team that doesn't have a lot of draft capital. They don't have a lot of prospects. They seem to be trying to, you know, put Band-Aids on big open cuts with some of the signings and the moves. And although I do love seeing Ryan McDonagh come back for the nostalgia, you also say goodbye to Mikhail Sergachev. So, you know, again, I think this is a pretty big miss by Tampa Bay. And I think this is something that's going to hurt them long-term for not getting assets back for a guy like Stamkos, who just came off a 40-goal season.
The rest of Frank Seravalli's top five, you got Jonathan Marchessault, Brady Shea, Brandon Montour, and Chandler Stevenson. Out of those four Huts, which one are you looking at with maybe a bit of a raised eyebrow going, that's an interesting situation?
You know, for me, it's going to be Montour. I think the fact I played with him, he fit in well in that system in Florida and the way he played offensively, where I just don't know if it's going to translate when he gets paid big money and he's been through a lot. So that is my worry, especially a guy that's come off 2 seasons of grinding, going to the cup final, winning the cup. That is a lot of hockey put into Brandon Montour, a guy who plays a lot of minutes. And I always feel that sometimes these guys that grind their whole career and then get their payday, there's going to be a bit of decompression, right? It's something that I went through, like not necessarily that scale by any means. You grind so hard to try to get that contract, then you finally get to that point, there might be a bit of a step back for him. And I think that is, you know, that is the proof. You never judge a guy for getting paid, but I think that's something you might see with Brandon Montour here.
Yeah, and you're looking at the bottom of your screen right now at Frank Seravalli's top 75. It's the player's name. It's the team they played on last year. As they sign with a new team, boom, it's going to get changed colors. It's going to have a new logo on there as well. So we'll be keeping track of everything throughout the day. In that top 5, Colby, Marchessault, Shea, Montour, Stevenson. It's honestly sounding like all 5 of Frank's top 5 could wind up in new homes today.
Yeah, and a couple of guys that I'm really looking at are Chandler Stevenson and Marchessault. And the reason I'm looking at those guys in particular is because those guys have a lot of playoff success, right? These are not guys that, you know, put up points during the regular season and then get sleepy in the playoffs. Both won a Stanley Cup. One won a Conn Smythe a year ago. Neither have really tailed off in the way they play. You know, you look at Chandler Stevenson, who's only been earning $275. I mean, he's in line for a massive raise, at least double plus some. But those are the types of players that you could bring in and you could say, look, you know, we'll give you the 5 years because not only are you bringing production, but you're bringing experience. Jonathan Marchessault, you know, albeit a smaller player, he plays heavy on the puck. He plays heavy on battles. He plays heavy on the walls. And then a guy like Chandler Stevenson, who might be one of the more underrated 200-foot players in the entire league. So I think those two guys coming from Bruce Cassidy's coach teams, and I think that gives you a little bit more of a check because it shows that you can play for a coach who, you know, will give you a hard time, will hold you accountable, and will put you into a structured system. I think there's a major amount of value on those two forwards in particular, and I would expect to see both of them do really, really well today when Frank eventually tells us where they're going.
You, Carter Hutton, Colby Cohen, you guys are going to be around throughout the entire 3 hours, helping me and Frank break down all the big moves and little moves we see throughout the day. And as signings continue to trickle in, we're going to have our guy Matt Larkin from Daily Faceoff here to break down the grades. So Carter, Colby, going to set you guys off to the side for a little bit and get to our pal Matt Larkin here for some trade grades. Once again, brought to you by Bet365. Larkin, we got a handful of big signings that we can dig into here. Let's start with the one we saw latest last night, and that was Sam Reinhart going back to the Florida Panthers. What do you make of this one?
I really love this one for the Panthers, Tyler. To me, this is an A because Sam Reinhart, it's not like he's 32 years old. He's 28 years old. And I think his game is built to age pretty well because he's not one-dimensional. Yes, he's coming off a 57-goal season, but he was one of the best defensive forwards in the league. He's so brainy. He does so many different things well. You can put him up against the other team's top players as well. So to me, also just that AAV, it's really below his real value. That's the power of the no state income tax in Florida. So I just love it for all parties. It's an absolute home run. 1 week after he scored the Stanley Cup winning goal. What a week for Sam Reinhart.
Yeah, speaking of that no state income tax, Tampa Bay also taking advantage of that a little bit when you look at the signing bonus heavy contract they give Jake Gensel. Are you just as high on the Gensel signing?
I'm not quite as high. So with Jake Gensel, he's 29. That's a 7-year deal that pays him till he's 36 years old. The Tampa Bay Lightning, they are one of the oldest teams in the NHL. And if you factor out Steven Stamkos, okay, yes, they're getting a little bit younger here. But I still think this is a team it's past its window. And I feel a little bit of denial here from Julien Brisebois. I want to see the Lightning get a little younger, go backward to go forward. And I think this sort of keeps them in this murky middle territory. Gensel's going to be good. We know for his entire career, he's played with elite players. He had 25 points in 17 games after coming over to Carolina at the trade deadline last year. I'm sure if you stick him out there with Kucherov, he's going to be fantastic. But long-term, I don't know how well this deal is going to age for Tampa. So that's a B+ for me.
One more I want to throw past you here, and it's out in your neck of the woods in Toronto as the Leafs have agreed to terms with Chris Tanev after acquiring his rights. It is a lot of term. It's a decent chunk of change for a guy who's in his mid-30s. What do you make of the Tanev signing?
It's funny because I've been pounding the table for Toronto to acquire Chris Tanev for, 6 years. So it's a little bit past the prime now for Tanev, 34 years old. But at the same time, you have to think of the Leafs as a very much a win-now operation. He is exactly what they need. He's a right-handed shot. He's underrated as a puck mover, but of course we know his calling card. He's an absolute warrior. He blocks shots. He shuts down the other team's best players as well as any defenseman in the league. So he's going to be a massive help in the short term. That's the A part of the grade, but it's an A-. We know, of course, it's not going to age that well. We know Chris Tanev, every 2 seconds, he's headed down that tunnel blocking a shot. He's often getting hurt. So I do think that it's sort of baked in that there's a trip to Robidas Island maybe halfway through this contract, LTIR, down the road for Chris Tanev.
Yeah, I mean, it's long. And that's the thing for me is, again, this is going to run until he's 40, 41 years old. And $4.5 million is a nice cap hit to have him at. And I guess if you're the Leafs and you just kind of accept that, hey, down the road, every year we are going into LTIR space, then you have no problem taking this risk versus what maybe some other teams would have been willing to stomach. But 6 years by 4.5, that is a fantastic ticket from the player's perspective for a 34-year-old. Not bad for what would in all likelihood be his final contract in the NHL. Matt, you're going to continue to swing by with trade grades as we work throughout the day. Appreciate you doing this.
Absolutely, buddy. Having fun.
We also threw you a bit of a side task as well as you put together a list of your top UFA value targets. I wanted to dig into that now before the signings start rolling in because we are about 36 minutes away from the official opening of unrestricted free agency. So let's take a look at Matt's top UFA values for this year.
Hello, everybody. It's Matt Larkin here, managing editor and senior writer at Daily Faceoff, counting down my top 5 value picks in unrestricted free agency. I think you can get really good bang for your buck with these players. First off, at forward, we're going to say Victor Arvidsson. He's run into a lot of injury problems, but if you look at the per game production, he averages 26 goals, 63 points per 82 games as an LA King, still an efficient scorer. And yes, there's an injury risk, but it's priced in. You're not going to have to pay him extreme term because we know because of that injury risk, he's going to have to take a deal that mitigates risk for the team. So there's a great opportunity to get a feisty forward who's 31 years old. It's not like he's 41. He can definitely help a contender. Next up, we have the Duke, Anthony Duclair. We know, of course, the Panthers dumped that contract to the San Jose Sharks last year. He starts the year in hell in San Jose, but he finds a home in Tampa Bay at the deadline, ends up recording 8 goals, 15 points in 17 games, playing high in the lineup. We know he still has lots of speed. He's someone who is one of the more efficient scorers in the league. Goals per 60 over the last couple of years, 92nd percentile, very underrated. Next up on the list at 4, we have Daniel Sprong. He's someone, I joke, he's never going to be mistaken for a Selke Trophy contender, but he really scores a lot in the limited minutes he plays. 39 goals over the last 2 seasons with Seattle and Detroit, averaging just 11 minutes. And he's actually top 10 in the NHL in goals per 60 minutes at 5-on-5 over that span, right in between Carter Verhaeghe and Zach Hyman. So a lot of people are sleeping on Daniel Sprong. On defense, we have the bruiser, the right-handed shot, Matt Roy. He's extremely physical. Some might wonder, well, isn't he going to get a nice payday? Maybe he will, but I think he will still exceed the value that he's going to get on that contract. If you look at his expected goal share, 5-on-5 over the past season, top 15 in the NHL, 1 spot above Roman Josi. Matt Roy, one of the most underrated shutdown defensemen in the league, and you can probably get him for the price of a second pair defender. So he's one to watch as well. And at number 1 on the list, we have Laurent Brossoit. We all know he can stop the puck. Of course, he's considered one of the better backups in the NHL, but I don't think people realize this may be a starter who's masquerading as a backup. If you look at the goals saved above average per 60 minutes, extremely efficient. Only 1 goaltender in the entire NHL was better. He was better. He graded out higher than his own teammate, the Vezina Trophy winner in Connor Hellebuck. And I think that Brossoit, given the fact he's 31 years old, he's going to be available for a lot less than number 1 money, even though he might end up playing like a number 1 for his new team. And those are my top 5 value targets in unrestricted free agency.
Fantastic stuff from our boy Matt Larkin. You can see Frank Seravalli up in the corner working the phones on our insider cam. But let me just quickly, before we get to a couple of other panels here and dig into some big storylines going coast to coast around the NHL, here's what we've gotten over the last 24 hours. The Toronto Maple Leafs have been the big spenders so far, and maybe not on one big deal that would belong to Sam Reinhart, Jake Gensel, and the 2 teams down in Florida. But yesterday, Toronto agreed to terms with Max Domi on a 3-year contract with a $3.75 million AAV. Timothy Liljegren is returning to Toronto on a 2-year deal with a $3 million AAV. And then Joseph Woll, 3 years by $3.66 million. Then, of course, the Chris Tanev deal that we talked about with Matt Larkin. Patrick Kane, Showtime is staying in Hockeytown. He agreed to terms on a 1-year deal. Now, the AAV is low at 4.0 mil, but it has the ability to work itself up to $6.5 million through bonuses throughout the season. Sam Steele re-upped in Dallas 1 year by 1.2. Sean Durzi got a nice ticket out in Utah as Bill Armstrong and the Utah Hockey Club continue to retool their blue line. Durzi coming over, obviously he was a member of the Arizona Coyotes, but he gets a 4-year deal times $6 million. Connor Brown's coming back to Edmonton, 1 year, $1 million. Connor McMichael, RFA situation, re-upped in Washington, 2 years by 2.1. And Eric Johnson is going back to Philly on a 1 year, $1 million deal. All right, let's dig into our Nation East panel very quickly here as we welcome in Nick Alberga and Brent Wallace. Brent Wallace from Coming In Hot covers the Ottawa Senators. Nick Alberga of Leafs Morning Take. And Mr. Alberga, I will start with you. You just heard me rattle off all the contracts that the Toronto Maple Leafs have signed. What have you thought of the early work ahead of free agency by GM Brad Treliving?
Yeah, it's so hard to make a proclamation, obviously, on July 1st, but I think right now a bit underwhelming. I think the biggest piece that at least me and Jay Roseau were looking at here in the offseason was changing the culture, changing the core. And as long as that stays intact, I think it's going to be the same old same for this Toronto Maple Leafs. But I think it's quite clear they're trying to shore up their back end a bit. Sounds like Oliver Ekman-Larsson is going to be signing in Toronto as well, but the Tanev addition has been a nice piece. We'll see how that looks in a couple of years from now. So all in all, I would say underwhelming, I think, from my point of view, long term, but I see what they're doing. We'll see what they do over the next couple hours and days as well.
Nick, can I just interrupt? Why can't you be happy?
I don't know. I just I think it's just the same feel to this team. Like they're changing the coach, and it's going to be the same thing this year.
I see them adding a Chris Tanev for whoever knows how long. It's not going to be 6 years. Nobody feels that way. But I like Ottawa had highly sought for him. I think he's a really good piece to that blue line.
He is. I think he's really going to help Morgan Riley out. I think first and foremost, I think a big objective, guys, of the offseason for the Maple Leafs was shoring up the blue line. So I certainly think they've taken a step in the right direction. It's just more so up front. I think their big change where they come out of the season, they say they're going to make a massive change, and I guess it's going to be the head coach. So we'll see how it works out, but I wouldn't be stunned if a year from now we're having the same conversations, unfortunately.
Okay, can I Tyler, I don't mean to take over your show. Can I quickly ask you about Joel Edmondson? Because rumored to be coming to Ottawa in the mix. And I don't understand it because he's a left shot D. Ottawa's in desperate need of a right shot. He's 34 years old. I don't know where he fits in on this team. He's big. They need size. But that means Jacob Chychrun's got to be going somewhere.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of moving parts, Wally, obviously, to the Ottawa Senators, right? Like they're a team, and also like the New York Islanders and the Buffalo Sabres, where it's like, and I understand they got Linus Ullmark. That's a really good start, but like, what are you doing? What else is up for your team? I think Edmondson brings experience. He really, really intrigued me, obviously, coming into Toronto at the trade deadline, but the way he played in the Stanley Cup playoffs, you understand, you comprehend his worth, how calm, cool, and delivered he was, how steady he was, a calming presence from what I hear. He's a huge guy in the room. I know it's cliche to say that, but I actually think he's a guy who's going to be undervalued today for some reason. So I think that'd be a really good pickup for Ottawa, guys.
Out in your neck of the woods, Wally, I'm looking at their Cap Friendly page as we go through our last meaningful day with our friends at Cap Friendly. But I see only 7 forwards signed for next season. They obviously have the glut of defensemen, as you mentioned. They did their work on it between the pipes with Linus Ullmark, but there's so many question marks here. Are they going to be able to move on from Chychrun? There's now a Shane Pinto situation that's reportedly popping up. And again, they have north of $10 million in cap space, and they only have 7 forwards on the books. What area are you most intrigued by with this Sens team today?
This Shane Pinto thing is huge. And I had reported earlier in the year about their two sides weren't close to a deal, and it remains that way. I think Pierre LeBrun is the one to report it today, that perhaps Shane Pinto, who's RFA, may ask for a trade. I don't know, they only, as you said, I think it's $11.3 million. They've got to get Shane Pinto signed. And what he gets signed for, they don't have to get him signed if he asks for a trade. But if he's going to be on this roster, it's got to be around $5 million. That doesn't leave you a lot. And you still need a right shot D. Like, somebody's got to go in there. They have Travis Hamonic, who they're not buying out. He's left at 1.1. Like, right now, he's their third pairing D. And Jacob Bernard-Docker is their second pair. It's not a very strong right side. There are huge holes, and there's not a lot of money. And so the argument is, what happens to Jacob Chychrun? $4.6 million this year. They've got to. I think they got to move him. He just doesn't fit in the pieces that they're trying to build here. That's all.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because again, Chychrun at $4.6 million is actually a nice little value contract. Like, he outperforms that. And when you only have $11 million in cap space, like, is there a part of this Sens team that would maybe try to keep him? Is there a path to keeping him and maybe trading someone else?
So much money is the problem. Like, 4.6 is great for this year. What happens when he wants 8 next year or 7? That's the issue. And I don't think they can afford to do this as they get further down. They've got Tyler Klevin coming. They've got some pieces on that left side. But right now, it's not the piece they need. So if they can spend that money and put someone on the right side, and I'm going to go back to you for a second, Nick. Did Joel play a lot of right? Edmondson play a lot of right in Toronto, or did he stay mostly left?
It was mostly left, but they tried everything in terms of configurations, but it was mostly left. I think just one final thought as well on Chychrun. I think if you're not going to re-sign him, and it doesn't sound like he wants to re-sign there, or even vice versa, I think today's got to be the day. Like, the next couple days, at the very least, you have to make a move. And I agree with you guys. I think it's going to happen here.
And there is one last point on Chychrun. Sorry, is perhaps assigned to an extension and then traded. We'll see if that transpires.
Little sign and trade action, which would be interesting. Let's bring in the third member of our Nation East panel. It's Arpon Basu of The Athletic. Excited to have you on board here on Free Agency Day, Arpon. And the Montreal Canadiens, they've been rumored around a couple of interesting veterans. There were rumblings about them and Patrick Kane, rumblings about them and Jonathan Marchessault. So the idea of the Habs getting aggressive this offseason and bringing in maybe even a high-priced veteran. Is that the right move in your opinion?
Well, the thing about Patrick Kane is you'd be getting one an extremely short-term deal, and I think the Canadiens are willing to spend, even overspend if necessary, to bring in some help at forward on a very short-term deal. You saw Patrick Kane wound up signing for 1 year in Detroit at a pretty decent number, actually, $4 million plus $2.5 million in bonuses, and I think that's would have been right up Montreal's alley. But that's why I don't anticipate. I know they're sniffing around today, but I think those are the types of deals you generally sign on day 2 or even 3. When a guy has slipped through that first wave of signings, is starting to look around, starting to see that maybe there aren't that many options, and then you can take the extra cash that Montreal's willing to offer, frankly, but not getting that term that you were hoping for on day 1. So didn't surprise me at all to see that they were sniffing around Kane. I'm sure they're sniffing around a lot of guys, but the fact is that the term that they're offering is not going to be very attractive to guys on the first day of free agency when a lot of teams are basically getting guys because they're willing to offer that term.
A lot of talk today, obviously, about the free agent list. Frank's top 75. We've been covered and floating through the bottom of the screen there. But also, I mean, there is an interesting trade market around the league. We saw a bunch of things go down on day 2 of the NHL draft. Are you surprised that maybe the Habs weren't active in any sort of a trade market, trying to, maybe not add a veteran per se, but someone more aligned in their window?
Oh, they're active. They just didn't execute any of them. They haven't been able to find a partner, but they're very active. It's no secret that Canadians have defensemen to sell, and they're young and they're cheap and they're effective. They're not top of the lineup kind of defensemen, but depth guys that can fill out your bottom pair, play in on a second pair in a pinch. But a guy like Jordan Harris, Jaden Struble, these are all young, cost-controlled guys who've proven to be able to play in the NHL. And I think you see every year in the playoffs, teams shuffling guys in and out on the bottom pair and not having really reliable players to play there. The Canadiens have a lot of them. They have roughly 10, if not more, defensemen who have a legitimate chance of making this team in training camp. Most of them are under 23. And so something's going to have to give. And waiver eligibility rules are going to squeeze the Canadiens at some point. I think a lot of teams know that. And so they're probably not giving the value the Canadiens expect for some of these younger defensemen, but their names are out there. They have a ton of draft picks next year. They don't intend on using them all in the lease. They have 2 firsts, 2 seconds, 3 thirds, if I'm not mistaken. So all those things are in play. The Canadiens are hoping to be able to turn those again into forward help. But I feel like there's kind of a disconnect between the value that the league puts on these players, particularly these young players, and the value the Canadiens are expecting to get for them.
Fascinating stuff out east where there are 3.
I got a question. Can I interrupt for Arpon for a sec?
Yeah.
Arpon, would they ever consider offer sheeting Shane Pinto? Because of the cost to give him a contract, if it's below 6.7, it's a first and a third. They've got 2 firsts next year. They've got 2 or 3 thirds. That's not a lot to pay.
Yeah, it's possible for sure. I mean, I just don't know why the Sens wouldn't match that. I know it's a lot to pay,
but they're
it's
also
a lot of
up
money,
against the cap with guys they need to get signed.
Right.
This is a team that's not making the playoffs in the last 7 years, and yet they don't know how to manage the cap.
Yeah, but again, you can't let a talent like Shane Pinto just walk out the door and get 2 picks for him either. That's kind of a danger precedent under new ownership, new management. I just don't see them not matching a Shane Pinto offer sheet and I don't see the Canadiens going big on term in an offer sheet that they're asking. Like, that's the thing, is that it's easy to give them $6 million on a 2-year term. I think Ottawa should match that all day, every day. If you go 5 years, now Ottawa says no, and probably Montreal's not even offering that. No other team is. So that's why offer sheets never happen. It's a ridiculous system. But in order to sign a player to an offer sheet, you have to make him an offer that is stupid, that is ridiculously bad for your own team in order to get the player, because it has to be that bad for the team to let him walk for the compensation, which does not match the quality of this player at all.
Right.
We'll have a little bit more on that later. Frank's got some updates on RFA stuff that we'll do in hour 2 of the show. Arpon, Brent, Nick, really appreciate your guys' time. We'll be coming back to our Nation East panel a handful of times throughout our show, but let's head out west where we got a similar panel built up. Excited to welcome in our friend Ryan Pike. He's the managing editor of FlamesNation.ca, and Ken Wiebe from the Winnipeg Free Press, Kenny and Rennie Show, along with Jeff Patterson as well from Rinkwide Vancouver and Canucks Army. Let me go in order here. I'll start with you, Ken. Out in Winnipeg, they had a couple of big rental splashes at last year's deadline. Sounds like Tyler Toffoli is going to be maybe finding a new home, but Sean Monahan, is there a path towards him being a Jet again next season?
Yeah, for sure. I think there would be a path, but the closer we get to the opening of the bell happening here, there's going to be interest around Sean Monahan. So barring a last-minute deal here, I would think he's certainly going to be at least listening to what the offers are. Frank mentioned some of the teams, that they'd love a reunion with Johnny Hockey in Columbus, some other Canadian teams on the list. But the Jets certainly throughout the weekend in Las Vegas here expressed an interest and desire to keep him around. Frank also mentioned backup goalie is a priority for the Jets here today behind Connor Hellebuyck. I'm with him. Eric Comrie makes a lot of sense. He played his best hockey under the tutelage of Wade Flaherty in his last stint with Winnipeg. He's the all-time leader in many categories with the Manitoba Moose at the minor league level. And the price point is key here, guys. Even though it looks like they have all this cap space, there's a lot of things to get done, including probably a bridge deal for Cole Perfetti. And their big hole right now going into the weekend, even after the buyout of Nate Schmidt, they need a right shot defenseman, I think, for that second pairing. Matt Roy, Sean Walker being some of the guys I would think near the top of that list. Looking more and more like Brendan Dillon is going to be on his way out, and who knows? He could be joining our friend Jeff Patterson there, depending on how things shake out. But there's going to be a lot of interest around Brendan Dillon. I think he may go east. At 33 years old, and given the way that he plays, I think that might be a better fit for him. But there's a lot of interest around Brendan going into today here.
Just quickly on the blue line in Winnipeg, you mentioned Schmidt bought out. Sounds like Dillon is going to be going elsewhere. What's going to be the approach in Winnipeg when it comes to filling those gaps? Is it going to be going into free agency, trying to get some veterans, or is it going to be maybe trying to get younger?
Well, they have some younger guys. Ville Heinola no longer waivers exempt, so he's a guy who can play both sides. But their surplus is on the left-hand side. They have Dylan Sandberg that probably wants to move, or probably moves up to the second pairing. Elias Salomonson coming over from Sweden, but he may need some seasoning time with the Moose here. So I would expect them to be targeting a veteran here on the right side, specifically a right-handed shot behind Dylan DeMello, who they were able to keep with an extension, but that's a definite priority here for today. And then as we also know, the status of Nikolai Ehlers is still a little bit up in the air. Could he be used to get a high-end, top four defenseman? That's a possibility. And the Rutger McGroarty situation didn't get resolved this weekend, so he could be a piece looking at maybe a larger deal if something is in play there.
Yeah, they do have a couple of fascinating trade chips as well as we head into the summer. J-Pat joining us live from Rogers Arena in Vancouver. Patrick Allvin, Jim Rutherford, they do not like sitting still. We had heard the rumblings that they were in on Jake Gensel. They obviously have a couple of UFAs of their own that it sounds like they are going to have to be forced to let walk in Lindholm and Zadorov. But what are you hearing about the Canucks today as they look to, again, continue trying to bolster this roster?
Yeah, all quiet on the Western Front right now, and that's the way Patrick Allvin likes to operate, but this is a team that needs to get better. Game 7 of the second round against the Oilers, but ultimately fell short, so 7 playoff wins where 16 were necessary. And the playoffs, while fun and re-energizing a fan base, also exposed some of the weaknesses of this hockey club. They need offense, and I do think they were prepared to step to the plate and take a big swing at either Jake Gensel or Sam Reinhart. If they had hit the open market, they're gone, and so what is plan B? And that's where I say it's quiet out here. Patrick Allvin likes to operate in a cone of silence, but he's going to have to let his actions speak for themselves because Elias Pettersson needs scoring help on the wing. And so you start to look at who's left on the board. Is it a Jake DeBrusk? Is it perhaps, taking a swing on a Jeff Skinner who got bought out in Buffalo but has some ties to Jim Rutherford from their time in Carolina? Anthony Duclair, the well-traveled veteran. There are other names, Victor Arvidsson. I think those are the types of players that the Vancouver Canucks are going to be left to look at to try to bring in some scoring help. They also need one more NHL-ready defenseman. You talked about Zadorov leaving, Lindholm as well. And so, I look at this day and think that the Vancouver Canucks, if they're going to have some success here, it's probably shopping in the bargain bin, but finding a couple of guys that have a track record of scoring in the National Hockey League, an NHL-ready defenseman, and they may need some veteran help in goal as Casey DeSmith's going to test the free agent market. And there's still some question about whether they're ready to turn Artur Silovs loose as a full-time NHLer and a backup to Thatcher Demko after his prime performance in the playoffs. So I do expect the Canucks to be busy, but some of those big name targets that they have their eye on, they're off the board already. So it's going to be moving on to plan B and having to be ready to pivot in a hurry here.
Ken is live from Winnipeg. J-Pat's live in Vancouver. Ryan Pike is live and stranded in Las Vegas. He wasn't able to get home after the draft, but Pike, appreciate you hopping on from the hotel room. Calgary is in a different spot than those other two Western Canadian teams. They have cap space, but they're in this retool, rebuild, whatever you want to call it, period. But there are still some rumblings they could be in on a handful of free agents. Is that the right approach, in your opinion, for them to be going and spending money, or should they just be focusing on getting younger and not throwing a bunch of coin at some veteran options?
Well, I mean, Craig Conroy, he's been adamant that he wants the team to remain competitive. To be blunt, I don't think he wants them to get their heads kicked in as they get younger. So I think it's sort of the balancing act of, can you bring in, I'd use goaltenders as the best example. Without Jacob Markstrom, they're going to be going with the tandem of Dan Vladar and Dustin Wolf. But Dustin Wolf has played 18 NHL games, and Vladar is coming off major hip surgery. So they're looking for a veteran, a reliable third stringer, because if Vladar has a flare up, if Wolf needs a bit of insulation, you need someone to do that. So they're looking for someone on a short-term deal to fill in a gap. And I'd say that approach will permeate pretty much how they look at all free agency. Oliver Shillington's testing the market today. They might need to have a second, third pairing defenseman to sort of insulate their group. They're going to be looking for some forward help. Andrew Mangiapane just went to Washington on a trade. They'll be looking for potentially some center depth. They'll be looking for potentially some winger depth. They really liked what Connor Zary and Martin Pospisil brought to their team last year. They want to have the opportunity for Wolf to be that this year, to potentially have Matt Coronado, to have Jacob Pelche, maybe even have Samuel Hanzik have the opportunity to do such things this year. But they also want to have the ability that if those kids aren't quite ready yet, they can insulate them a bit and not throw them to the wolves.
Interesting stuff. Ken, I'm sorry, I forgot that you are also stranded out in Las Vegas. You don't get a lot of sympathy being stuck in Las Vegas, of all places. But again, apologize for that. I hope you guys can get home safely soon.
Frank was the smart guy getting home early, not asking for sympathy, though. Should be a fun day here. And I could see Shillington maybe being a possibility for the Jets, too, depending on the price point.
Oh, that would be an interesting ad. Maybe, again, middle of the road, where you're still dipping into free agency, but you're not going for those 30-year-old plus veterans. You're going for a guy who's still got clearly a lot of gas in the tank. Ken, J-Pat, Ryan Pike, appreciate your guys' time. You'll be back a little bit later on in the show. That is our Nation West panel, brought to you by Bet365. We're going to continue cruising along. We're going to get back to our main panel with Colby, Cohen, and Carter Hutton here in just a second as well, but appreciate the time from our three guys out west. There was no one there from Edmonton, because I'm the Edmonton guy. I'm supposed to be asking myself questions, boys. But anyways, when you look at what the Oilers could do here on July 1st, I'm not expecting a lot of big noise from Edmonton here on the opening day of free agency. I think they'll take care of a lot of internal business. They've already done that a bit, re-upping Connor Brown with a 1-year, $1 million contract. I could imagine Matthias Janmark getting a deal to return to the bottom six. Both those guys had such strong playoff runs for the Oilers, but for the team that made it to within one win of the Stanley Cup, a middle six ad is how I'd call it. I don't think they're shopping in the upper echelon, going after a guy with a $6 million plus AAV because they can't afford it. But maybe name in the middle six, Victor Arvidsson, Jake DeBrusk, a piece like that is what I could see Edmonton getting up to. But we are 11 minutes away from free agency officially kicking off here around the NHL. Former NHLers Colby, Cohen, and Carter Hutton joining us. And Carter, from a player perspective, you joked off the top, this is a totally different experience for you. But at this point here, 11 minutes leading into free agency, what's that feeling like when you're an unrestricted free agent and you're waiting for that market to open up?
Honestly, it was different when I was younger, because when I was younger, I was always a little bit on the outside looking in, especially the way my career came in. I wasn't drafted. I kind of had to fight my way into the league. So at this point, I was always somebody's third or fourth option right in net. So you're kind of waiting to see where the chips fall, who gets who. And then as I became, solidify myself as an NHLer, usually by this point, it's already in place, right? Especially years that I had success. And I think the biggest thing I noticed as my career progressed is how much work gets done behind the scenes especially when that free agent period talked. Like I remember my wife and I flying to Buffalo, getting to see it before I signed. And you kind of had all these, you see the insiders getting all this inside track. So I think it takes the pressure off these guys a little bit because things start to happen pretty quickly. It's for those, those mid guys that aren't getting the big deals or aren't the number one, that first A list of free agents, that it's a little bit stressful, right? Because there's only so many seats at the table, especially as a goalie, right? Now you start thinking about, maybe I was the number one option on a team, but I'm trying to get a little extra money, where there's a few other teams that I want, but they have to go get their guy because they can't sit around and wait because there's only so many guys that need to get it done. And for the, a great signing for me would be, the Oilers getting Picard done, a 2-year deal for him, getting it done early for him. Both sides win, right? That's where I find free agency with goalies and the situation I was always in, earlier the better, because it's more about trying to get the term. We had chatted with that about Colby, for me, especially when the dollars weren't huge.
Yeah, and the goalie game with the musical chairs as well. We're going to see that play out a little bit throughout the day. Laurent Brossoit, one of the names that is on the market. We're taking a look at Frank's top 5 here. I'm pulling up the Daily Faceoff signing tracker, which you can get at dailyfaceoff.com. And one of the deals that has popped up on here over at Daily Faceoff is Brandon Montour getting 7 years and just north of $7 million with the Seattle Kraken. So it sounds like he could be on the move out of the Stanley Cup champion Florida Panthers. What do you make of Brandon Montour cashing in, Cole? This is a rather large deal.
Yeah, look, and I think you're going to see a situation here where a player goes from a team where he didn't necessarily have to be the guy. He didn't have to be the big minute guy. He was able to play on a second pair. And I know you kind of went into this a little bit earlier, Carter, when you were talking about the juice that you get when you get that big contract. Maybe it's a sigh of relief, but you think about Florida and you had that top pair of Ekblad and Forsling, and you saw the matchups, right, that those guys were able to take in order to give Montour the ability to kind of do his thing and roam a little bit, take more opportunities, take more chances in the way that the aggressive style that Florida played. How many times did Paul Maurice say, look, we're going to give up breakaways. We're going to get beat. I want my defensemen, playing a little bit of riverboat hockey, and it ended up working out for them. They win a cup, and it certainly came down to the wire, but now he's going to go to Seattle. He's going to go play for Dan Bialsma, who, look, do we really know what to expect out of him? It's been a really long time since Dan Bialsma was an NHL head coach. So what kind of structure is he going to be looking into? What does the appetite for Ron Francis in the style, in the way that he wants that team out in Seattle to play? So I do think it's going to change his matchups. Now he's going to be making in the 7 million range. So there's more expectation. But I will say this, defensemen that made $5.5 million the last couple of years with the cap going up, and you look at the percentage it's going to count against the cap, all of a sudden 5.5 is now really 6.5, right? So I don't think the number is crazy. I think it's fitting. He won a Stanley Cup. There's always going to be a little bit of an added bonus to a guy who just won a Stanley Cup. But it will be interesting to see a smaller player who plays physical, plays with a lot of bite. Is his body going to break down? But ultimately, UFAs usually get a little bit more money and a little bit more term, especially after coming off of a big Stanley Cup win.
Yeah, and we were obviously looking at him throughout the playoffs as a guy who maybe saw his value decrease a little bit. He was on some of those lists we did on Daily Faceoff Live throughout the run, but obviously not the case. And of course, nothing official yet because we're still about 7 minutes away from the official opening of free agency in the NHL. But again, tons of things going on behind the scenes. I mean, Hutz, you mentioned back when it was the legal tampering period. I mean, it was basically whatever, 11 or 12:01. It was like boom, 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 all these signings. And we still get a little bit of that right now. Did you ever have any experiences like that when you were going through before the legal tampering period of like the wink, we're interested in signing a backup goalie for this amount, wink?
Yeah, I've had a few of them. Honestly, my year in Nashville, I always thought was crazy. I had played 3 years in Nashville. I signed a 2-year extension after my first year. And then we started negotiating pretty early. And that was when the Saros time was coming. And, that's when it was, my agent obviously does what he does. And you hear from other people outside. And I always found that anyone attached to it, when it comes to general managers, they keep their distance. It could be a laundry boy, it could be whatever, but teams were interested. And then for me, it was always the fact of taking a chance on myself. And I've had the one where when Brian Elliott got traded at the draft and they were going with Jake Allen, St. Louis wasn't even close to being on my radar. It was the Islanders, it was Dallas, and there was one other team in there. And that was when I had decided to part ways with Nashville. It was just, I knew it was coming. I felt like there was a ceiling above me because the year before I'd played so well and Pekka played. Whether Pekka was playing good, if he was playing well, you had to play him because he's playing good. If he wasn't playing good, we got to play him because he's getting bad. So for me, it was, I knew there was a ceiling above me, which I accepted and understood. And then the opportunity came with St. Louis where he approached me before the trade happened with Brian Elliott and said, we're going to trade him. We want Carter to come there. And it was a great fit because Jake Allen was getting his first kick at the cat to be a starter. I was at that point where I had played enough games where I necessarily wasn't in that starter category, but I was a solidified backup that could earn a little some more minutes. And I remember that call going down and happened. I remember, I think I was out here actually at the cabin. We were having a good night, and next thing you know, I get a phone call from Jordan Newman, my agent with Sports, and next thing you know, the deal's done the next day. So it's one of those one that comes across the thing, but it's stress-free when it comes to, I guess the player standpoint.
Yeah, I can imagine. Digging into Frank Seravalli's top 75 here is, again, we should be getting a flood of news in the next 10, 15 minutes. This is going to be the busy stretch for us. We dug into the top 5 a little bit. I want to talk about that next rung down with you, Colby. You got Lindholm at 6, Matt Roy from LA out at 7, Zadorov. Sounds like there's some interest out east from a couple of teams. Brett Pesce, a defenseman who spent the last chunk of years with the Carolina Hurricanes. Matt Duchene, coming off his nice bounce back season, comes in at Frank's 10 spot, and we'll continue to rotate some of the names here at the bottom of the screen so people on YouTube can keep an eye on. But who's maybe a check down option here from those big guns, the Stamkoses, the Marchessaults, and names like that? Who are some check down names that maybe you're looking at and going, hey, that's going to be a sneaky good signing, maybe even if they're not getting the 7x7 that some of the big guns are getting?
You know what? I'm going to drop you a little bit lower on that list, and I'm going to go with Shane Gostisbehere. I mean, I don't think enough people are talking about what he has really done since he left Philadelphia. I mean, he goes to Arizona. He completely resurrects his career. The Flyers had to give up things just to get someone to take his salary, and he goes there for a couple of seasons, does well. He goes to Detroit. He plays on that top power play. I mean, when you talk about guys who are dynamic along the offensive blue line, guys who can move laterally as well as anybody in the NHL, as we're just got done talking about Montour, a guy who can move incredibly well. I think Shane Gostisbehere is a good name to look at. He's obviously a left shot, so he's not a righty. Puts him in a little bit of a different category. But I just think you know what you're getting with him. Yes, is he going to kill penalties for you? No, but he's a guy who you know is going to put up 40 points. You know he's going to play on your power play. He's got a big shot, Tyler. So that's the guy I'm looking at a little bit.
Frank Seravalli has breaking news. Let's go up to our insider cam. Frank, what do you got?
Yeah, we didn't even make it to 12 noon, and yet we've already got a big deal. It's a trade. We were just talking about Jakob Chychrun. He's heading to the Washington Capitals in exchange for Nick Jensen and a 2026 third-round pick. Jakob Chychrun was number 7 on our trade targets board almost the entire offseason. We talked about the overload that the Ottawa Senators had on the left side of their blue line. They had Sanderson and Shabbat both making $8 million plus. There was no way to re-sign Jakob Chychrun and devote upward of $24 million to the left side of your blue line. So the Ottawa Senators sending Jakob Chychrun from one nation's capital to the other nation's capital.
Nick Jensen 2 more years on his deal at 4.05. So Ottawa picks up a little bit of cost certainty in this deal. Thank you very much, Frank. We are a minute away from free agency officially opening, and Frank will continue working away up in the insider cam. Let's go back to our main panel and get some instant reaction to that trade. Jakob Chychrun going from Ottawa to Washington. It is Nick Jensen and a 2026 third round pick. So, interesting deal here. I'll be honest, from Ottawa's perspective, I know they're trying to win now and they're trying to compete. 33-year-old Nick Jensen and only a third-round pick for Jakob Chychrun. Colby, I'll go to you first. This doesn't feel like enough. I thought they were going to be able to get like a quality, maybe top 6, middle 6 forward for him.
Yeah, I'm surprised the return. I think the Washington Capitals really just created a little bit of a wizardry type of move for Brian McClellan, who has signaled to us over the last couple of weeks that the Washington Capitals are not a team they're looking like they're going to a rebuild anytime soon. You've got Alexander Ovechkin chasing. Sounds like Frank might have something, Tyler.
Frank, quickly, you can just unmute.
Yeah, so Steven Stamkos tweeting just now that his time in Tampa Bay is over. Thank you, Tampa. 2 heart emoji. I don't have the words yet. I will soon. Still too early to process. Just wanted everyone to know how thankful we are for 16 years as a Bolt. My family and I are excited for the next chapter. I'll add to that, sources suggest that Steven Stamkos and the Nashville Predators are closing in on a deal. The true end of an era. Big day for the Preds. They've got a lot in store today. Steven Stamkos, Jonathan Marchessault, I believe Brady Shea, as well as a big name goaltender to play in tandem with UC Saros. So monster day upcoming potentially for the Nashville Predators. But let's start bombing out some of these deals here. Here's a 5-pack from the Chicago Blackhawks. Breaking news as we start at 12:01 p.m. Eastern time. Tyler Bertuzzi, 4 years times $5.5 million. Teuvo Teravainen, a reunion with the Chicago Blackhawks, 3 years times $5.4 million. 3-time Stanley Cup winner Alec Martinez, 1 year times $4 million. Pat Maroon, another 3-time Stanley Cup winner, 1 year times $1.3 million. Veteran Craig Smith, 1 year times $1 million. And actually, it's a 6-pack. I lied. It's a 6-pack with the Chicago Blackhawks. Here's a big one in net. Laurent Brossoit, 2 years times $3.3 million. So a 6-pack to open up free agency from the Chicago Blackhawks. Agreed to terms with all 6 players.
Okay, so let's dig into everything Frank just threw at us here, and it lines up nicely actually with our main panel. Colby, I will come to you first on Chicago's run of adding veterans here. We saw them do it a little bit last year, and now looking back, that was maybe a lowercase version of what we just saw with names like Teravainen and Bertuzzi. I mean, those aren't the 35-plus Perry Foligno ads. Those are guys who are going to be able to help them win for a number of years here. What do you make of what Kyle Davidson's getting up to in the first minute of free agency?
It's a blend, and I'm not surprised because you bring in guys who can play in your top 6. You provide them probably more money and more term than they were able to get elsewhere. And you've got Connor Bedard. You've got Taylor Hall still sitting there. Don't forget Seth Jones on the back end. Don't forget the fact that Alec Martinez has won a Stanley Cup. Craig Smith has been in the NHL for a very long time. I think this is an opportunity for him to get into a lineup and really maybe find his way onto a third line rather than being a guy who's your, 12th or 13th forward, which we saw at times where he's in Dallas. And I do think Craig still has some game left. And another guy who's incredibly well respected around the NHL. So you kind of look at this and it's part of the next step of this rebuild. They're handing out these 1 to 3 or 4 year deals. And I think that gives Kyle Davidson an opportunity to look at some of these players and say, are you really a part of the long term? Or are you more of that middle reliever that's going to come in and get us through the 4th, 5th, and 6th inning until we get to those big players, those closers, or those young guys, Carter, are truly ready to step into the lineup?
Yeah, and obviously adding Brossoit in net is a great pickup in my opinion. This is a guy, he's 31 years old, similar to myself when I made that jump to Buffalo, but this is a guy that has a lot of upside. He's played a lot of good minutes, but he's never played a ton of minutes, and this is a good fit because I feel with Peter Mrazek, and they've committed to him, and he played a lot of good hockey, a guy that's known for injury, so they're going to need a guy that can be stabilizing in there, especially the fact that they're trying to beef this team up. They have Connor Bedard. They know what they have to build around. They have some great players coming up, and for Brossoit, I got to know him a little bit while I played against him. This guy is an absolute workhorse. This is a guy that you want in your culture, you want as a goalie. If he's not playing right, he's used to being in this situation. He's not a guy you sign and then he complains about not playing and he undermines the starter and is a negative in the locker room. This is a guy who's going to put his work in and he's going to help this team get better. And for him, this is one of those contracts where, he got his payday, right? That's that case where it's 2 years, $3 million. But if he has 2 good years, maybe he's the goalie for the next 6 to 7 years for the Chicago Blackhawks team, because I feel like that's what can happen with this team. because Mrazek's kind of on his way out. He got his last deal. Now it could be Brossoit's net moving forward, especially as they start to add some more pieces into this Chicago Blackhawks lineup.
And Peters played really well there. I mean, the years that I was working there, he was playing really well. And I think that Arvid Soderblom proved that he's not an NHL goalie. Go ahead, Tyler. Sorry.
Back to Frank. Frank, what do you got? Because I see your Twitter is just piping hot.
Yeah, it's a lot to pump out here. Let's add some more to the mix. The Calgary Flames are another interesting team to watch today. Sources say they're closing in on a deal with Anthony Mantha. Sounds like a one-year deal that'll end up in the $3.5 million range. The New Jersey Devils are closing in on defenseman Brendan Dillon. Sounds like a 3-year deal just under or around $4 million per. Brett Pesce, long rumored 6-year deal times $5.5 million with the New Jersey Devils. Tyler Toffoli, this is one of the real surprises of the day in terms of where he ends up landing. It's the Bay Area, 4 years times $6 million with the San Jose Sharks. That's a deal that, look, the Sharks need to get to the cap floor. They want to bring in a veteran that certainly can provide some juice. As hinted at earlier, the Seattle Kraken have agreed to terms with veteran defenseman Brandon Montour, 7 years times $7.14 million. So that is close to $50 million. The Buffalo Sabres have agreed to terms with speedy forward Sam Lafferty, 2 years times $2 million. And let's see what else I have in the hopper. Sources say the Boston Bruins are getting both Elias Lindholm and Nikita Zadorov from the Vancouver Canucks previously. Both guys part of their playoff run, waiting on terms. Sounds like both of them are going to be well paid and for a long time. Let's see what else I can drop here before we go. Sounds like the Vancouver Canucks are going to be adding defenseman Derek Forbort. I'm working on the terms there. Pittsburgh is going to be adding another Boston kid with ties to Mike Sullivan and David Quinn. Defenseman Matt Grzelcyk is expected to land in the Steel City. Let's see. What else do we have? Here's another one. The Calgary Flames. Sources say the Calgary Flames are closing in on a deal to bring Jake Bean home. He was not qualified by the Columbus Blue Jackets on Sunday. Looks like a 2-year deal just under $2 million per season. Bean, of course, a Calgary native and the son of former Flames president and CEO John Bean, who is recently outgoing.
All right.
That's all I got for now.
All right, we'll send you back to the insider box. We're not going to do our full Nation East panel, but let's very quickly head back out to Ottawa and bring in Brent Wallace. The Jacob Chychrun trade has gone down kind of right on cue as we were talking about it about 30 minutes ago. Wally, Nick Jensen, 2026 third coming back. Are you surprised that this was the approach from Ottawa, swapping him for right shot D? Did you maybe think there was a chance, or should they have maybe tried to swap him for maybe some help up front?
Well, they still need to figure out the help up front too, because they've only got 7 forwards signed for next year. But the right shot D was a massive hole, and then they needed a huge upgrade on that side. And we've all said for, it feels like a year now, that Jacob Chychrun wasn't the right fit in this team, that they needed to address the right side and not the left when they brought him in. So not shocked that he's now been dealt. They do address a need. Nick Jensen, 33 years old. He makes like $600,000 or $1,000, I think around $600,000 less than Jacob Chychrun. He signed for next year. So they don't take a lot of term, a little less money, gives them the right shot. Like everything lines up perfectly for it. Now they just got to go out and execute.
Are there any names out there on the forward front in terms of UFAs that you're looking at for Ottawa as good fits?
Well, it's you know what, Tyler, I'm going to start with you. We have talked on the show about Warren Fogle. And I'm curious of your thoughts on him. He's UFA right now, if I'm not mistaken. I don't think he signed. Your thoughts on him as a player? I think he might be a fit here in Ottawa.
Yeah, one great room guy. Like, he is loved by his teammates. Inconsistent at times, but I think he's the kind of guy you can pencil in for 15 to 20 a year. I'm not sure if he's got at this point north of 20 goal potential, but when he's on, physical, skates, forechecks, and has decent touch as well. He generated probably more breakaways than almost anyone in that Oilers bottom 9 is what we like to call it. So it would be a decent fit for a team looking to just add secondary scoring punch. So that would be interesting. Wally, finish up.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
I was just going to wrap up. We got some other things coming down the pipe here, breaking. So here it is, a frantic 10 minutes, as I'm sure you can. So thank you, Brent Wallace. We'll be coming back to you as things continue to break in the nation's capital. But obviously, there is a lot going on around the NHL as everybody is getting their first round of signings through. We're going to go back to our main panel here in just a second. And where I wanted to go with you, Carter and Colby, is on the Steven Stamkos front. As Frank said, it sounds like it is trending towards the Nashville Predators for Steven Stamkos. He posts the farewell message out. Oh, Frank, yes.
Yeah, so Steven Stamkos, just to put a bow on that, he is heading to the Nashville Predators, as hinted, 4 years times $8 million. So it's a big deal. That's 32 schmil for Steven Stamkos with the Preds. And here's another whopper. As I mentioned, Brady Shea, 7 years times $7 million, $49 million for Brady Shea with the Nashville Predators. As I mentioned, big day. Stamkos, Marchessault, Shea. The Music City is going to be bumping.
Wow, that is a lot of money being thrown out by Barry Trotz. Carter, that is your former neck of the woods. Let's start with Stamkos and go from there. Listen, I love it. I think this is a team that, with UC Saros and Roman Josi, Philip Forsberg, like adding to that core, this elevates them in that race in the Central Division, which is wildly competitive. It is hard to dislike going out and adding a 40-goal guy. And honestly, they have the cap space. I don't dislike the terms here.
Yeah, I like it too. I think this is a good fit. And if there's one thing that Barry Trotz is going to prioritize, it's veteran leadership. And this is a guy that has it, and he's a room guy, and he still scores. He still gets the job done, right? It's not like I get the idea of Tampa, moving on and getting Getzo going younger and seeing what they needed to fit, but I still think Stamkos has a lot of productivity in him, and Nashville is an appealing place to play. They have built a culture there, the city, everything. For you guys haven't been to Nashville, it's a beautiful place to live, have a family, you can live, and you can do everything you want to do and still get that big city feel and the fan base that is just passionate. So this is an exciting time, I think, for the Nashville Predators and for Steven Stamkos, right? This is obviously going to sting a bit, and there's going to be we got Frank here.
Frank.
Yeah, a couple more big signings here. David Perron is going to the Ottawa Senators. There were a bunch of teams that had interest in David Perron on a 1-year deal. He is going to the Sens on a 2-year deal at $4 million per. So the Sens have made a conscious effort in their marketing play to include the French market. Now they're going to have a native French speaker in David Perron added to the team, 2 years times $4 million.
And that was some of that scoring punch we were talking about them potentially adding with Brent Wallace a little bit earlier on. But again, a lot going on. When things slow down in hour 3, I think we'll be able to, maybe in a bit more of an organized way, go through some of these. But again, thank you, Frank. If you missed some of these, before I go back to the main panel, let me just do a quick run through of everything we've got in the first 13 minutes of free agency opening. You have David Perron, 2x4 out in Ottawa. Brady Shea with a stunning 7x7 out with the Nashville Predators. Steven Stamkos, 4x8. He is done in Tampa Bay after 16 seasons as a Bolt. The Toronto Maple Leafs adding a couple of Stanley Cup champions. Oliver Ekman-Larsson gets 4x3.5, and Anthony Stolarz is expected to sign in Toronto as well. The Calgary Flames made a couple of smaller moves as they added Jake Bean to a 2-year deal worth just under $2 million. Anthony Mantha gets a 1-year deal out in Calgary at 3.5. The New Jersey Devils, they loaded up their blue line, which is something we had been speculating about for a number of weeks here. Brendan Dillon gets 3 years, somewhere in the neighborhood of $4 million. And Brett Pesce gets a 6x5.5 with the New Jersey Devils. In Chicago, the great veteran load up by Kyle Davidson continued. He added a whole whack of names. Tyler Bertuzzi gets 4 by 5.5. Pat Maroon 1 by 1.13. Teuvo Teravainen 3 by 5.4. Craig Smith 1 by 1. Eric Comrie's going back to Winnipeg for a 4th stint. Tyler Toffoli is going out to the San Jose Sharks 4 by 6. So $24 million on Tyler Toffoli. Sam Lafferty 2 by 2 in Buffalo. Brandon Montour 7 by 7.14 out with the Seattle Kraken. So he goes from Florida up to the Pacific Northwest to join the Kraken. And just this one, because I saw Frank tweet it, and I got my Frank Seravalli tweet notifications on. A 1 year by 5 for Jason Zucker out in Buffalo. And I'll even give you a fun one here. Shout out to Johnny Lazarus. But Jason Gregor reporting that the Ottawa Senators have signed Noah Gregor to a 1 year deal at $850K. I'm not sure who Jason's source is, but I'm going to trust him on this one. Noah Gregor goes to the Ottawa Senators. Let's go back to our main panel of Colby Cohen and Carter Hutton, mainly because I'm out of breath. When I'm out of breath, I go to Colby Cohen. Colby, any of these really surprise you so far as I rattle them off?
I just cannot believe how Barry Trotz, the GM, is operating. I just never would have really thought this would be his approach. He's such a methodical guy. You think about the way his teams used to play and sort of the tight structure. And I know that was more the New York Islanders, but if you remember when he went to the Washington Capitals, it was because he didn't necessarily have the top end on the island that he would have when he went to Washington. But I don't know, Carter. I'm shocked to see, all these guys, top 3 players on Frank's best 75, all end up with big deals, all end up in Nashville. Barry Trotz is absolutely cooking on all that stuff. And then the one other thing I just want to drop in there before I kick it over to you is there's rumors out there about Shane Pinto having already asked for a trade. And I just want to dispel those rumors. That's not true. Shane Pinto has not asked for a trade. Things are not going well with this whole situation in Ottawa. But the rumor and the report that he physically asked for a trade, that is not true at this very time. Sorry, Carter, go ahead.
No, I love it. I love the fact that Barry Trotz is breaking the mold here, right? Early in his GM career, he's been around the game a long time. He sees what they need, but I also love the idea of UC Saros, right? This is a guy they believe in, a guy that is a true pro. He brings it every day. They committed to him, and why not go for it now, right? This is a team I think for years have, with an ownership group in the sense of when I was there, it was like we always were a contender. They did their best to run the business, but now to actually spend some money and legitimize, the fan base to make a push for it. So it's nice to see, I think, for Nashville, for the guys in there, your Philip Forsberg, your UC Saros, Roman Josi, these guys have been there a long time to beef up this lineup. And then I think for the Nashville Predator fan base, the fact of we're going all in here, we're taking a shot at it. And I love it. I love these signings. I think it's going to be exciting. And for Barry Trotz, good for him. He's been around long enough. He doesn't need to wade in the water here. Let's go all in.
Frank?
Yeah, so interesting news here. The Calgary Flames thought they were pretty close with Victor Arvidsson. Turns out he's actually going north up Highway 2 to the Edmonton Oilers, a 2-year deal at $4 million per season. So, look, I had linked the Oilers to Arvidsson maybe 6 to 8 weeks ago. This is a guy that, yes, he's been injured, but has tons of game left and was actually north of a point per game this season. So I like the little different element that Arvidsson would bring to the Oilers. Certainly an interesting guy to watch for the defending Western Conference champs. I mentioned, sounds like the Canucks are adding defenseman Derek Forbort. Did we talk about Jason Zucker, 1 year at $5 million?
Yep,
in the Buffalo Sabres. Anthony Stolarz is official, 2 years at $2.5 million per with the Toronto Maple Leafs. And I think that means that you're up to date.
I believe, yes, we are up to date. The little bit of breaking news in that one, Victor Arvidsson coming out to Edmonton, only played in 18 games last year, had to battle through some injuries, but that's a guy who in the previous 2 seasons had scored 20 and 26 goals respectively, has not played a full season in the NHL. I mean, if you count 77 games as a full season, I guess he did do it in 2022-23, but obviously last year injury riddled, the member of that LA Kings group that was eliminated by the Edmonton Oilers in 3 consecutive playoffs. So as we wait for Frank to get back to us with some breaking news, let's go back to our main panel in Colby, Cohen, and Carter Hutton. I don't mind that little piece of work from Jeff Jackson and company in Edmonton. $4 million, maybe a hair rich, but you got to spend up in free agency. When Arvidsson's healthy, I actually think he will be a very nice compliment to Leon. I think to Leon Draisaitl on the second line. For whichever one.
Yeah, I believe so. I believe he will be. And when he's healthy, right? A guy I played with in Nashville, he came in as a younger guy, definitely undersized. I don't think people thought he was going to be able to make the adjustment as well as he has. And he's a guy that is seen all over the rink. He can play a physical game as well. He's not shy to get into the mix. And I think for the Edmonton Oilers, it's a perfect time for them, I think, to assess where their playoffs fell short in a sense, right? And see what they needed, especially firsthand getting to watch the Florida Panthers, how they're built, and getting to see, we know this league, it's a copycat league, right? You're trying to find that fix. And I think for Arvidsson, he's going to be excited to be on a team that can be a winner and at the same sense, stay healthy and be part of this Edmonton Oilers team.
Yeah. We'll see if Edmonton gets up to anything else. Just pulling up their, again, cap-friendly page right now. They're sitting with about $11.9 million in projected cap space, so call it 12. They are now down to 8 with the signing of Arvidsson. That is with 9 forwards, 5 defensemen, and 2 goalies under contract as well. So still a little bit of work to do on the fringes here for Jeff Jackson as he heads into his first full offseason at the helm out in Edmonton. Again, going through the long list of signings that we've seen today. Actually, Colby, let me wrap up the Nashville conversation. And then because it sounds like, I mean, I would imagine they're done. They've made 3 massive splashes already. But when you look at that Central Division and you have Dallas, you have Colorado, Winnipeg is going to continue to try and stay competitive. Is this enough for you to consider Nashville in that upper echelon of the Central?
I mean, absolutely, because you've got goaltending. You've got a guy like Roman Josi, and we know what his talent is like. Now you add Brady Shea, which kind of replaces, the Ryan McDonough that you just walked away from. And, I really like these moves. I think this puts them in the conversation in the Western Conference. And I'm sitting here as I'm talking to you, trying to pull up the cap friendly just to see what, now that all these trades have come through, like what is their situation 100%, look like? But you've got that Andrew Brunette up style tempo of hockey. They're going to score goals. They're a team that is going to hurt you in a lot of different ways. And you bring in these guys again that have won Stanley Cups, that know how to ramp up when the season starts to get to the end. How many times do we see a team run through the regular season and then they kind of look like they run into a brick wall as they get into the playoffs? So I really like all the moves that they've done today. We haven't even talked about the fact that Philip Forsberg now is going to have all these other threats around him. Gustav Nyquist, who kind of resurrected himself last year and reminded people just exactly who he is. I think the one area where they probably still have some work, and maybe they're going to look for some bargain, $850 to $1 million guys, is their back end, because you've got Josi, you've got Shen, you've got Fabro, you've got Lausanne, you added Brady Shea. You're still going to need a little bit more, and then expect to see them with a goaltending announcement at some point. They're going to be in the market for a backup goaltender, Carter, because you want to have that 1-2 punch with UC Stars.
Yeah, and I don't know if that's a fact where Askarov comes into play. I know there's been talk. I know teams, I think Frank mentioned that they took calls on him, but it's going to be a tricky situation, I think, in that sense of you still need to protect Stars, because he is a guy that wants to play a ton of minutes. And I think at 8 years now, he's starting to get a little older in that sense through this run. What do you do if you find a guy on a short term, a little bit more veteran to, back him up? Because I also think in the minors, Askarov is going to get to a point where he wants to play. And, where does that go from there with that relationship with the team? And we know time after time, sometimes Russians get a little antsy to get up there and play. So it's going to be a good fit. And I think adding a couple key guys, I think there might be a little more veteran leadership on that back end. But I think the culture they've built now and these guys that are proven winner is going to be a huge upside here for the Nashville Predators for Brunette to play with.
This one a minute ago from Frank Seravalli. The Washington Capitals have agreed to terms with defenseman Matt Roy, formerly of the LA Kings. It's a 6-year deal at $5.75 million per year. And the next I wanted to go to. Sorry, what was that, Cole?
No, it's me. I can actually chime in. There's a couple other things happening. Pierre LeBrun reporting Sean Monahan is going to the Columbus Blue Jackets to be reunited with Johnny Gaudreau. 5 years times $5.5 million. I know the Winnipeg Jets were a team that was willing to put some term on the table. I know the Calgary Flames and Montreal Canadiens, two of his former teams, were monitoring that situation closely, but weren't willing to give any of the term that Monahan was looking for. So he ends up in Columbus. We heard GM Don Waddell, he told us a couple weeks ago, we want players who want to be in Columbus. And so 5 years times 5.5. There you go.
All right, there you go. So a couple more signings from Frank. Also, as we go back to our main panel, I need to give some love to Carter Hutton, who was playing insider for us, but I didn't give his comment the love it needed. Matt Murray back in Toronto, Carter.
Yeah, it's something that I just think he's a veteran guy, and a guy that's been a winner. He's won. And also the fact of the matter is he's coming off double hip surgery, right? And for the first time in a long time, being healthy. And I think being healthy for him, he can still be effective. He's a guy that is a very cerebral goalie. And for me, with his size and his smarts and his pedigree and experience, they're going to need him, right? Joseph Woll is a guy that has been hurt a lot, and we'll head her over.
Frank, what do you got?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. The Carolina Hurricanes, who have had a tough stretch here with some players that they've had to say goodbye to, Brady Shea, Brett Pesce, Jake Gensel. They're bringing in defenseman William Carrier on a 6-year deal, 6 years times $2 million. That's an interesting deal for the Carolina Hurricanes. And another one, the Detroit Red Wings are bringing in defenseman William Lagesson for some depth help, 1 year at a league minimum $775,000.
Okay, sorry, Frank, not to I know you have a million things going on, so I want to clarify this. William Carrier, the forward, or Alexander Carrier, the defenseman? You're muted, sorry.
And I'm muted. I'm having a day. So, sorry, yes, I've confused the two. Alex Carrier, the defenseman, is staying in Nashville.
Okay.
William Carrier, the forward, 6 years times $2 million in Carolina.
All right, good. The great Carrier confusion of 2024, but I'm glad we're on the same page with that. Thank you very much, Frank Seravalli. All right, now we go back to Carter and Colby, and we'll finish up that thought on Matt Murray being healthy in Toronto.
Yeah, and there's obviously that he's still a young guy, 30 years old, and he has a lot of upside to him. And a few people had reached out to me. He's a Thunder Bay boy, so I know him pretty well, where he was at and what he wanted to do. And I think for the Leafs, in the sense of Joseph Woll is a guy that they think is their number one, but he's been injury prone, right? Anthony Stolarz can go there and get it done. This is a good depth signing. I think he's a guy that you may see in the crease. And if there's something that the league taught us last year, you cannot have enough goalie depth. Even what Martin Jones came in for the Leafs last year and played very valuable minutes to kind of calm the ship when Samsonov was struggling. He went on his little sabbatical down to the minors to try to find his game. So this is an interesting one for me, and it's exciting, I think, in Leafs land. I know they wanted to try to find a guy that was a big 1A, 1B to be with Woll, but it's tough when there's so much money tied up front with their forwards.
Mm-hmm. Colby, I want to talk to you a little bit about the Washington Capitals and continue that conversation. What the hell are they doing there? Because they go get Dubois and then they add Mangiapane, and it's like, okay, we thought they were heading towards a retool, but now maybe they're not. It looks like they're trying to be competitive. They dish out money for Matt Roy. They trade for Chychrun. Wildly active. Do you like it, though?
I mean, listen, I think when you have Ovechkin, you're really just never going to go into this retool, rebuild mode, even though he's definitely, at the end and chasing all these records. But, on top of that, they bring in Logan Thompson, who's costing you absolutely nothing at $766,000, who now all of a sudden you have Lindgren and Thompson, which is a tandem that could probably win you a playoff series if you find your way into the playoffs. Don't forget about the fact that, Ethan Bear signs with them.
Colby, you will be able to tell us,
ahead,
we're
Frank.
going to get into it later, but Frank's got a big one here. Frank.
Yeah, there's a couple whoppers here. The Vancouver Canucks announcing that they've agreed to terms with Jake DeBrusk on a 7-year deal at $5.5 million per season. So that's huge. Jake DeBrusk gets some serious term and at a sizable raise at that. So some long-term security for Jake DeBrusk. Here's another interesting one. Sources say the LA Kings have agreed to terms with defenseman Joel Edmondson, 4 years times $3.8 million per season. So that's interesting. The Canucks also announcing just now Kiefer Sherwood has agreed to a 2-year deal at $1.5 million per. So, man, it's it just keeps coming here.
And they don't stop coming, and they don't stop coming. We'll send Frank back to the insider cam there. I said yes last night on the DFO rundown. I said, hey, maybe Jake DeBrusk, Vancouver Canucks, now that they've missed out on Jake Gensel. Not that I'm an insider. It was a random guess, but he gets 7 years by $5.5 million. Let's once again bring back Colby Cohen and Carter Hutton. Gentlemen, Colby, let's finish up on the Washington thing first. I will try to keep myself as organized as I can here. Finish up your thought. What are they doing in Washington? Do you like it?
Listen, they're trying to win. I mean, this is a general manager who, in my opinion, knows that it's swing for the fences, or he's probably, moving to a corner office into a job where he's not in charge every day. McClellan's been at the organization for over 15 years. He started as a scout. He's been the GM for 10 years. He's won a Stanley Cup. But again, Chychrun, Van Riemsdyk, Matt Waugh, John Carlson. I mean, you start looking at their back end. I mean, they've got players who could win. The Mangiapane thing, the Dubois thing, the Logan Thompson. This is a team with Spencer Carberry that looks at getting into the playoffs last year and looks at who they got to beat out to do that again. And I think that they can find their way back into the playoffs next year and try to milk Ovi for every bit that he can. The other thing to keep an eye on is, rumor is that TJ Oshie's going to retire. And right now, they've got the $9.2 million in LTIR for Backstrom. They're probably going to get some sort of relief, whether he retires or whether he goes on LTIR with TJ Oshie for, all the issues he had. That's another $5 million that's not on the books right now that potentially opens up for them. So I could see Washington keep going and look to keep adding with maybe some of these more bargain level players, but they don't look like a team ready for a rebuild, Tyler.
No, not at all. So you're looking at their cap situation right now, and of course a dangerous game to be playing because things are changing every second, but they are 1.7 million over with just Backstrom on LTIR. So when you factor in TJ Oshie, you'd be right, Cole. Seems like maybe about $4 million more that not only will they have to play with in LTIR space, but again, the goal in LTIR is usually to get as close to that number as you can without going over it to maximize it. So I think we could very easily see Washington go out and maybe do a little bit more here, either in free agency or on the trade market. They have been active in both. So, Carter, they belong in this kind of weird, mushy group out east where it's the Devils trying to get back into the playoff picture, the Sens, the Sabres, the Wings, the Penguins, and now Washington as well. Do you like these moves enough? Do you think they got enough impact pieces to push them to the top of that group?
I think that something that might be a bit of an oversight in the sense of the Hershey Bears as well. This is a team that just won back-to-back Calder Cups, and there's going to be some guys that are going to be ready to take that step, that have played some championship hockey, that are ready for the NHL level. And in that, adding Logan Thompson, I think, is a great depth signing, a guy who's played in some big games now. He has some playoff hockey. And for Charlie Lindgren was, kind of lightning in a bottle last year, right? He played very good. And I don't know if he is a guy that is going to be the guy to push you over the top, but with how Darcy Kemper played last year, he struggled. It almost got to the point where Lindgren had to play. Kemper became a bit of a liability. So I also think having that depth to go with this is going to be able to take a little bit off the plate for Charlie Lindgren. And especially now added this decor, they're going to be a better team in general. So I also love the idea. For me, Spencer Carberry comes in there and he has these guys believing. They obviously love him, respect him. He did a great job. And the fact you have Alex Ovechkin chasing a record that I think everybody wants to be a part of. I think everyone sitting here wants to see it. And I think the Capitals did a really good job today of at least putting themselves in the mix to battle in that division.
Canucks quickly announcing Danton Heinen on a 2-year deal worth $2.25 million. So Vancouver stays busy. They grab DeBrusk and a handful of other names. Colby, Carter, going to set you guys off to the side here, because with this slew of signings, it means we got to slap some grades on these bad boys. So let's go back to Matt Larkin of Daily Faceoff, and let's grade up some of these big ones. And Matt, we got to start with the number one name on the board. Steven Stamkos was a free agent for all of 4 minutes, and then he signs in Nashville. What is your grade on the 4x8 that Stammer gets in Nashville?
Oh, this is really exciting, Tyler. I'm giving this one an A. I don't think that term is totally prohibitive, 4 years, and it's exciting for the Predators. It's funny. I was with Roman Josi last week doing a story talking to him about how Barry Trotz has changed the culture and made this team really competitive. And this just sort of is a continuation of the behavior we've seen from Trotz since he came on as GM. He's shooting his shot, man, and I really like it. We'll get to the Shea deal, which is a little maybe flying too close to the sun, but Steven Stamkos for 4 years, obviously going to bring a big locker room presence, Stanley Cup winner, future Hall of Famer. Nashville's going for it, baby. I love it.
Double jeopardy. Let's get to both those Nashville signings. Jonathan Marchessault, 5x5.5, and you have Brady Shea. Terms not official quite yet, I don't believe. Don't see him on the cap friendly, but maybe you are. I think Frank might have had him earlier as well.
Yeah, Brady Shea is 7 times 7.
Oh, yes, 7x7. Thank you, Frank. What do you make of these two?
Okay, Jonathan Marchessault, of course, Conn Smythe Trophy winner. He's a bulldog out there for a small player. And again, he's another guy who I think really fits this team's culture. I do like the signing. It is worth noting that Marchessault, he's a late bloomer. He's a guy who I believe is 33 years old already. So you have to keep track of how old he's going to be. I think he'll be 38 when that deal is done. So for me, it's a B+. Love him as a player, but I don't know how well that's going to age. And Brady Shea, he's someone that's interesting to me. He's mobile for a big guy. 7 years, that's a lot of term at $7 million for a player who also, late bloomer, one of the better goal-scoring defensemen in the league, especially at 5-on-5, but sort of breaking out relatively late in his career, late 20s, and you're paying him till he's 37. That's kind of star money or borderline star money. I feel like he's better as a middle pair defenseman, and he was very insulated in Carolina, playing behind maybe the best shutdown defenseman in the league in Jacob Slavin. So I don't know if maybe Shea's going to be a little exposed on that deal. That's why it's a C+ for me, that one.
Let's go out to Boston, another double dip out in Beantown. Lindholm and Zadorov both going from Vancouver, now out to Boston. The Lindholm one felt like the worst kept secret for the last 3 months. It always was like, hey, he's a great fit out in Boston. They need center help. His brother's obviously there, but how do you grade out those two?
I'm going to back up Elias Lindholm on this one because we know it was a disaster from the moment he was traded to Vancouver pretty much. But I'm still giving the signing a B. I think we have to look at the entire body of work. And for much of his career, he's been one of the better two-way centers in the league. I think he really fits Boston's game in that sense. And you could argue that relative to what we thought he might have cost a year ago, this is somewhat of a discount. I think he finds his game in Boston. He's going to be settled. He's going to be putting his roots in there long-term. He's going to get back to being a player who you can pretty much move all over the lineup. He can kill penalties. He can go on the power play. He can be a first-line center in a pinch. He can be a second-line center. So for me, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. It's still a lot of money, but it's a B for me. Nikita Zadorov, I'm not as high on this one. I think he's dining out a little bit on that mini offensive explosion we saw in the playoffs. If you look at, it's almost the reverse of what I'm saying with Lindholm. The majority of Zadorov's career, offense has sort of been a bonus. It's not really something you can rely on him year to year. And when you're getting to that AAV, that much money, you sort of are pricing in offense. It's a C+ for me. He's a mean customer out there, but again, I don't know if his body is built to age that well over the course of the contract. He's a big guy, plays a very rugged style, of course. So I think it's just a so-so signing for the Bruins.
All right, and last one, it broke a little bit before free agency officially opened, but Brandon Montour in Seattle, 7x7.14. Frank and I had joked he was one of the guys on the list, he lost some money in the playoffs. He clearly did not lose any money from his playoff performance.
He did not, and this one is really interesting to me. I apologize for the frog in my throat that just jumped in there. Brandon Montour, so again, big case of a late bloomer, 16-goal and 73-point season in 2022-23. And this is a guy who I think most people, if you asked how old he was, they wouldn't realize that he's 30 years old already. He had shoulder surgery last summer, and obviously that silenced him for part of this season. So I don't know. I feel like you're paying him a little bit for what he's done and not what he's going to do. Seattle already has Vince Dunn as someone who can quarterback the power play. I know they don't play the same side, but there's a little bit of a skill redundancy there. And I see Montour is kind of taking the money and running here as someone who has the Stanley Cup ring. I don't know if that's going to be a particularly competitive franchise for a while in Seattle. And for the Kraken, I almost feel like making the playoffs in their second season, it messed up their trajectory. They'd be better off slowing things down and building up that pipeline. I don't love this deal for them. He's still going to be a pretty good player in the short term, so it's a C+.
An A for Steven Stamkos. A few C pluses when it comes to the three defensemen that we've seen go off the board. Lindholm gets a B. Marchessault gets a B+ for his ticket in Nashville. Matt Larkin, appreciate you popping on once again. We'll chat with you in probably about 45 minutes when 30 more signings have rolled in.
Oh my God, yes, I hope so.
All right, let's continue along with the show here, and let's bring in one piece of our Nation West panel and our friend Jeff Patterson from Rogers Arena out in Vancouver. And the Canucks have certainly made some noise over the last couple of minutes here, and they don't get Gensel. We had heard that he was a target for the Canucks. Their check down option ends up being Jake DeBrusk. I don't hate the dollars. The term is significant. What do you make of this signing and this fit?
Yeah, they didn't get the Jake they were looking for, perhaps, but they get the Jake that ultimately they have signed here. Look, 27 years of age. If you're going to go term, you may as well take a swing on a guy that's among the younger free agents in the class. 3 times a 25-goal scorer in the National Hockey League, twice at 27. When I talked to you last hour, we talked about the fact that the priority for the Vancouver Canucks was finding some scoring help on the wings. And so Jake DeBrusk certainly falls into that category. Is he a top-line player? I know he had 19 goals this past season, so a bit of an off year for him. But he's also a player that has close to 100 playoff games. So this is a Canucks team that wants to build off the return to the playoffs last year. So Jake DeBrusk certainly has a scoring profile, but also has some of the intangibles, I think, that a team that's trying to take that next step can certainly add, and that is the fact that DeBrusk has been there, done that, seen it all when it comes to playoff hockey. So it would feel like this is a fit to play alongside Elias Pettersson. Rick Tocchet is big on his duos. He's got JT Miller and Brock Besser, who both had terrific seasons last year, but part of the problem was they wheeled through on the wing with Elias Pettersson and really didn't find anybody that they liked. Nils Höglander had a nice season. I imagine that he'll get another look up in the top 6 as well, but they wanted to go out and bring in scoring help. So they have done that. $5.5 million. Goal scorers get paid in the National Hockey League. I can live with the dollar figure. But again, going max term and a free agent deal certainly carries some risk. But again, this is a player that won't turn 28 until the season begins. So I think the Canucks see that and think that there's every reason to believe that Jake DeBrusk can be productive through the bulk of this lengthy contract.
On the blue line, I mean, up front, Lindholm goes to Boston. That was expected. There was never going to be a reunion there. On the blue line, though, Zadorov, there was talk and interest, obviously, in him returning to the Canucks. It doesn't happen. And now you look at a blue line that will be Hughes, Hronek, Soucy, Myers, Juleson, Mark Friedman's under contract. Frank reported on Derek Forbort going to Vancouver. Is that blue line good enough, or do they need to keep adding?
I think they keep looking, certainly. And we saw last year in season that Patrick Allvin wasn't afraid to make deals, first with the Zadorov trade late in November and then ultimately getting Elias Lindholm. So, I don't think the Canucks were all that concerned with being the biggest of spenders on July the 1st. I think they realize they don't play hockey now until October. And even then, they know that they've got a good mix here. They've got the coach of the year. They've got the reigning Norris Trophy. They've got the runner-up for the Vezina. They've got a 100-point player in JT Miller. I've said all along in this market, Tyler, that no matter what the Canucks do here on July 1st, and really this offseason, the biggest priority for this hockey club is finding a way to get Elias Pettersson back to star level. This is a guy whose contract now kicks in $11.6 million for the next 8 seasons. He had a rough go of it down the stretch, and really in the playoffs was almost a non-entity. And so we can talk about adding Jake DeBrusk and pieces on the blue line. The core is in place, but so much of what the Vancouver Canucks are in terms of their mix and the projections for this hockey club revolve around a guy that's been a 102-point scorer already this season. And yeah, he had 89 points, and so a decent total. But really from the All-Star break on and then in the playoffs, Elias Pettersson looked like he was in his head all night long, just wasn't a factor, certainly at the level that they wanted or expected from him. So they can add pieces today, but they need to wave their magic wand and figure out a way to get the dynamic superstar Elias Pettersson back in the fold here.
Appreciate your time, Jeff. We got to get to Frank, though, on some breaking news. We'll have more from Jeff and the rest of Nation West throughout the show. Frank, couple of signings. What do you got?
Yeah, a couple signings here, a couple big ones. Nathan McKinnon will be happy. He can breathe a sigh of relief. Jonathan Drouin going back to the Colorado Avalanche on a 1-year deal. So Drouin returns to the Avs after finding so much success there this year. And we're starting to get some clarity on the goaltending market. Cam Talbot is heading to the Detroit Red Wings, sources say, on a 2-year deal at $2.5 million per year.
Cam Talbot becoming a terrific puck doku answer. Also, Jonathan Drouin, Frank, after his strong bounce back, are you at all surprised he didn't end up getting maybe more term from Colorado?
I think they were trying. I think they're stuck with their cap situation right now. So it seems like Gabriel Landeskog is close and could be ready to play for game 1. So you need his cap money. And you're going to have to carry, at least for the first day of the season, Valerie Nichushkin, because I don't think he's eligible to come off of his third stint on the player assistance program until November 15th. So you have to have space for it on day 1, and then you can figure it out from there. But those two things are really hamming up the Colorado Avalanche, and they didn't really want to say goodbye to someone like Ross Colton or make a salary dump.
Interesting stuff. All right. Thank you very much to Frank. We'll send him back over to the Insider Cam. I mentioned Cam Talbot. Rangers, Oilers, Flyers, Flames, Wild, Sens, Kings, and now the Detroit Red Wings will be team number 8 in his career. Let's continue breaking things down here again, 2 by 2.5. And when there's a goalie signing, we go back to our main panel and ask our boy Carter Hutton about it. We had heard rumblings that Detroit was in on a few things. There were rumors about them and John Gibson earlier on, or I should say a couple of weeks ago, not so much earlier on in the offseason. But Carter, what do you make of the duo now of Husso and Talbot, and what can Talbot bring to that crease?
Well, I think just veteran leadership as well, too. Cam Talbot is a guy that has been serviceable everywhere he's gone. He's had playoff experience. He's been in every situation. I think for Ville Husso, a guy who was playing well, had some injuries, struggled with at times. And I think this Detroit Red Wings team is trying to make a splash here. How close they came to, getting into the playoffs last year. Obviously, that was some exciting hockey at the end. Some of the games I think everybody was glued to. And for Talbot, a guy I played against, similar age, he's been very stable in his sense, right? I know at times with LA, everyone thought he was a product of that system, but everywhere he's gone, he's played very well. And I think for me, the fact of the matter is you get a guy like Cam Talbot and a team that has dealt with injuries. You look at last year carrying James Reimer, they had a lot to deal with. So I think just having goalie depth at this position is going to be huge for the Detroit Red Wings, trying to make a push in that division.
Yeah, interesting. Talbot goes to the Detroit Red Wings. Colby, bunch of things continuing to come in through here. Where were we at with you, Colby? You want to talk a little Vancouver Canucks with me? Jake DeBrusk. I mean, he's a mid-20s to high 20s at his best. This is one of those deals that I look at and I kind of go, the term is a lot. The money's a lot. It feels like they conceded on both getting DeBrusk, like they went to the high end of each.
Well, look, I think this is what you start to see happen when you hear a team like the Vancouver Canucks that was heavily interested in Jake Gensel and has been heavily linked to a couple of other players. But you do have to remember something with DeBrusk. He's a guy who has shown up in the playoffs, through the rocky seasons that he's had. And you go back to his days with Bruce Cassidy, and that just wasn't the right marriage, right? It wasn't the right fit, riding that sort of roller coaster, a roller coaster that I know very well, having spent a number of years playing for Bruce Cassidy, knowing how difficult that can be. So, look, I think you're buying into a player that you think hasn't potentially reached their ceiling. You're buying into a player that has some playoff experience, that comes from a winning culture in Boston over the last number of years. The rumors were that DeBrusk wanted to get back to Western Canada, whether it was Edmonton, Calgary, Vancouver. So right away, you have a player who's going to come in and be more comfortable. And I don't think you can put a price on that with a player. How many times do you see a big change of scenery not really working out all that well for a guy, Tyler? So, look, I think this is one that is probably going to be looked at under a microscope based on the inconsistencies in DeBrusk's career. But when you look at recency bias and you look at the way he plays in the playoffs and has played in the playoffs, I think this could end up being a good move for the Vancouver Canucks.
And quickly, Colb, on Jonathan Drouin going back to Colorado, we're still waiting for the terms on that deal. I mentioned to Frank that, I was a little bit surprised that he didn't maybe get some more security. Frank outlined why. This is also maybe as much as Colorado recognizing, hey, great fit in our system. We don't want to lose the player. For Drouin, take the 1-year deal. Maybe there was a 2 or 3 year offer somewhere else, but recognize that you're in a good spot after kind of bouncing around and struggling as much as he did early on.
Grass is not always greener. And I always give players credit for when they make a decision with that in mind, because it's always easy to sit there and think, well, what could be or where could be. But when you do, you get into a locker room, you're comfortable. You have a coaching staff that knows you. How many times do we see a player maybe overachieve a little bit, go to a new situation, Carter, and then they end up out of the lineup or they end up on waivers? And, I'm not necessarily putting Drouin in that category of like those 3rd and 4th line bottom 6 players, because he's much more than that. And he's proven that when everything is right for him. But I do give a guy credit for not having that grass is always greener approach. And then remember the relationship. Nathan McKinnon loves having him there. I think this is something that keeps your superstar happy. It keeps Drouin in a situation where he's going to be surrounded by all-star type of talent, Carter.
Yeah, and for me, it's something that hits home a little bit. I think after my first year in Nashville, I had a great season. I played 40 games, 120. They called Pekka Rinne to ask if I wanted to sign there again, right? Because they want you to be there. He wanted me to be his partner, right? You don't want guys in there that are trying to take the spotlight from. Nate obviously wants to play with him. And I think for him, sacrificing maybe a little bit, he could have went to the open market. But knowing you're going to a Colorado team where they want you to do well. The players are there still. It's still a very, very good hockey team, and you're going to do well. You stay healthy. There's a good chance Drouin has a really big year. And then maybe we're sitting here a year from now and he's signing a 3-year ticket somewhere else or a 4-year deal. This is a chance for him. I think it's a calculated bet on himself, but definitely, like you said, the grass isn't always greener there.
And Frank is reporting it's a $2.5 million cap hit for Jonathan Drouin in Colorado. So he is getting a nice little bump up from the kind of show me deal he was on last season, and obviously bounced back so well. We're coming up close to hour 2 here or the end of hour 2 of our commercial-free coverage of Free Agent Day here on Daily Faceoff. Big shout out to everyone watching over on the Daily Faceoff YouTube. The show is brought to you by Bet365, the largest sports betting platform globally. You can sign up today using the promo code DAILY365. Get in on a huge range of markets, whatever the sport, whatever the moment. It is never ordinary at Bet365. Just a quick one here from Frank. This one not exactly surprising, but it is a 1-year extension for Matt Duchene out in Dallas worth $3 million. So Duchene, after again, obviously not quite the same as Jonathan Drouin, but somewhat similar in the sense he went on the Prove Me deal, Colby, and again, he gets re-up for another year, another $3 million, and he doesn't leave a spot that's a good fit.
And you talk about a guy who has been really open about his family. He's really public when they put stuff on social media with his kids. And so, you're at a point in your career where you've made a lot of money, right? The big dollars are in your bank account already. At that point, you want to win. You want to not move your family all over. Your kids start to get towards school age. You got to start thinking about that. I know most of my friends and my peers that came into the league, Carter, we're about the same age, right? Those guys are all, their kids are all in kindergarten, in first grade, in second grade. And when you've made your money and you think about situation, those types of things really start to weigh in. So I think, again, give Matt Duchene credit. He probably could have chased a couple of years with a couple of more bucks, but he's made a lot of money. Dallas is going to be a team that we're talking about, as a cup contender again next season. And the grass is not always greener.
Yeah, and I think for Duchene, he is a guy that's always loved the South, right? When he went to Nashville, he loves the country music scene. He likes being part of it, and that's the choice you get as you've earned the right to do so, right? For Matt Duchene. And for me, the fact that he stays there, I had a conversation the other day with Linus Allmark about his no trade movement clause, right? Going to different teams. And a lot of those teams he didn't want to go to were big hubs, right? And I think that happens with a lot of guys where if he has, stability with his kids and his life, and something that I think sometimes from the outside looking in, more of a player's perspective, something I dealt with, even when I was in Nashville, my wife and I were dating at the time. And then when we had kids and I ended up signing in Buffalo, I had a few other options that were in bigger cities, bigger hubs. But what kind of life is that when you're living with your kids, right? It depends on the person, of course, right? And that's the player. He's earned the right to do it. So I think him staying there, a 1-year deal in a team where you're still going to be good. He's still his production didn't drop off. He had a great year. So it's going to be exciting, I think, for him and his family, knowing that he can stay stable and his kids can keep doing what he's doing, and he could be a Dallas Star for hopefully longer to come. It's a 1-year deal, and this is another one like Drew, and it could turn into a lot more.
Obviously, day one of NHL free agency, everybody thinks they're hitting a grand slam home run, but there's not that many that actually end up working out that way. Part 2 of our feature series from Matt Larkin features the best UFA signings of the salary cap era. Let's take a watch.
Hello, everybody. It's Matt Larkin here, managing editor and senior writer at Daily Faceoff, breaking down my top 5 free agent signings of the salary cap era. At number 5, we have 2021 Zach Hyman of the Edmonton Oilers, 7 years, $5.5 million a year. People forget he was 29 when he signed this contract. A lot of people thought it would age badly. He had goal totals of 27, 36, now 54, 12th in the NHL in goals since he signed that deal. Looking pretty good so far. At number 4, 2019, it's Artemi Panarin with the New York Rangers. 7-year deal, $11.64 million a year. Big money leaving the Columbus Blue Jackets at the time. Since he signed that deal, 4 seasons at 90-plus points, 120 this past year, second most by a Ranger in franchise history. And in his 5 seasons with the team, the only players in the league with more points than the Breadman, Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, and Nathan McKinnon. Not too shabby. Number 3 on the list, it's Scott Niedermayer, 2005, coming out of the lockout with the Anaheim Ducks. 4 years at $6.75 million. Niedermayer, he'd won everything he could win at that point. He had Stanley Cups with the Devils. He had a Norris Trophy. Decides to join his brother, Rob Niedermayer. What happens in Anaheim? He ends up being a first-team All-Star 2 years in a row. Niedermayer wins the Conn Smythe Trophy in 2007, helping the Anaheim Ducks win the Stanley Cup. Forms an absolutely legendary pairing with Chris Pronger. Excellent deal for the Ducks. Number 2, we're going back to the era of cap circumvention, everybody. 2009, Marian Hossa, 12-year deal. They were allowed back then. $5.275 million. What happens over the course of that deal? It gradually becomes a bargain, and for the majority of the contract, Marian Hossa, an excellent player for the Blackhawks, one of the best two-way wingers in the league. He wins 3 Stanley Cups, ends up a Hall of Famer, 500 goals, 1,100 points. Great contract for the Blackhawks. And number 1, it's the gold standard. Zdeno Chara with the Boston Bruins, 2006, 7-year deal at $7.5 million. We all know what happened. The Ottawa Senators made the wrong choice. They went toward Wade Redden, and they didn't re-sign Chara. Chara didn't like the way the negotiations were going, and he left. He goes to Boston, and he ends up a 5-time Norris Trophy finalist as a Bruin. He wins it once, wins a Stanley Cup as the captain, the only man to wear the C in Boston longer than Chara, Ray Bourque. And that's why it's number 1 on my all-time UFA signing list in the salary cap era.
Welcome back into the 2024 Daily Faceoff Live Free Agency Special. We're going to get back to our main panel in just a little bit. Of course, we'll be keeping you up to date on everything that breaks in the final hour of our show. But let's quickly do a little recap. Rattle through what we've seen so far in the NHL, starting at number 1. As you can see, Steven Stamkos going from Tampa Bay to Nashville. And the Nashville Predators, they are the big swingers of the early stages of this 2024 period, because they also get number 2 on the list in Jonathan Marchessault, a member of the original Vegas Golden Knights team, of those Golden Misfits. He goes on to join the Preds. Brady Shea is going to the New Jersey Devils. Brandon Montour goes from the Cup champs out in Sunrise, Florida, to the Pacific Northwest and the Seattle Kraken. Chandler Stevenson still on the board at number 5, the lone member of the top 10 who remains unsigned. Elias Lindholm is at number 6. He's going to Boston. So is his teammate in Vancouver, Nikita Zadorov. Matt Roy at number 7. He's going from LA to Washington. Brett Pesce goes to the New Jersey Devils after spending the last chunk of seasons with the Carolina Hurricanes. Matt Duchene is staying in Dallas on a 1-year extension. Coming in at number 11, Tyler Toffoli, going to be giving the San Jose Sharks a veteran presence after they draft Macklin Celebrini first overall. Toffoli goes on a 6-year deal to San Jose. Sean Walker still on the board out in Colorado. The deadline pickup for the Avs. Jake DeBrusk gets a 7-year deal. The Western Canadian boy goes to Western Canada and joins the Vancouver Canucks. Goss Despair still on the board. It sounds like he could be on his way out of Detroit as he tests the open market. Victor Arvidsson, after losing to the Oilers in 3 straight playoffs, is joining the Oilers on a 2-year deal worth $4 million. Drouin at 16 goes back to the Avs. Tanev goes to Toronto after they acquire his rights. Teravainen, Bertuzzi, they're both going to go give Connor Bedard some help out in Chicago. They both get deals in the 3+ year range. David Perron is going to Ottawa. We talked with Brent Wallace a couple of times on the show already about Ottawa looking to add some scoring punch. Perron gives them that. Sean Monahan reuniting with his boy, Johnny Hockey. Obviously started their careers together in Calgary. He finds his way to Columbus on a 5-year deal. Jeff Skinner bought out by the Sabres. He's still on the board. OEL, one of the other blue line ads for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Brendan Dillon, Nate Schmidt, couple of names out in Winnipeg on the blue line that are looking for new homes. Vlad Tarasenko, unsigned out in Florida. Another member of those Cup champs. They have a long, long list of unrestricted free agents here. Laurent Brossoit, we'll just do the top 30 here. Laurent Brossoit goes to Chicago from Winnipeg. Alex Wenberg, a deadline pickup for the Rangers, is still on the board, as is Anthony Duclair, and so is Yakov Trenin as well in Colorado. Let's continue along with the show here, and let's go back to our main panel of Colby Cohen and Carter Hutton as we officially head into the 3rd hour of our Daily Faceoff Live free agency special. And just the one name in the top 10 remains unsigned, gentlemen, and that is Chandler Stevenson. Colb, let me put you on the spot. Who's a team out there that could benefit from adding a good quality middle six center like Stevenson?
I mean, I think the question would be, who wouldn't benefit from a guy like Chandler Stevenson? I mean, it's really just going to depend on what he's looking for and who can fit it. Because as today moves along, Tyler, you start thinking about teams that don't necessarily, have the cap space anymore. But let me throw a sleeper out there, a guy who fits the bill of what Frank Seravalli said earlier. He said the Anaheim Ducks have a pile of cash. We know they like big, strong players. We know they like 200-foot types of players. Chandler Stevenson can be a threat offensively. He could be a threat defensively. So I do believe that, the Anaheim Ducks would be a team that could come in and offer him term and probably offer him more money than anybody else. Now, granted, do you want to go play in a rebuild? I'm not sure, but he's already living out on the West Coast. I know the tax situation from Vegas to California is slightly different. Obviously, I say slightly, that's a joke, but maybe that's a team. And that's not something that I have any inside knowledge on. I'm just going on the fact that Frank Seravalli told us off the top to keep our eye on Pat Verbeek and the Anaheim Ducks. And I'm thinking about who could give him big money and big term. I think the Anaheim Ducks, Carter, could be one of those teams.
Yeah, and I think Pat Verbeek has come out and said that. Just the fact of, I know they're in this rebuild phase, but you want to have guys there to build a culture too, right? I think something he's talked about, and he is a guy who's a winner and a good player and a good person. So for me, it's the fact of the matter is, I know when the opening bell rings and it's a mad dash and there's a lot of good players, but at the same time, I think at some point for these players too, it's like, if you aren't in that first little list, if you're not getting the deal you want, just because it's taking a little bit of time doesn't mean it's necessarily a bad thing, because now a lot of teams are going to be pushed against the wall being like, okay, what do we have to give up to try to land a guy here? Because now when all these names are wiped off the board, sometimes it can be weaker. It can hurt you, but also at times this might be the payday he's looking for. And I think deservedly so for the way he's played over the last few years.
And I think with Chandler Stevenson, if maybe the Detroit Red Wings are able to get that deal done with the New York Rangers, we've heard a lot of rumors about Jacob Trouba, what's going to happen with his money. Now, look, I think if the New York Rangers were able to clear that money off the books, I think put them right in there in that category. They need help at the center position. They haven't had success getting over the hump in the conference finals. Stevenson, a guy with a Stanley Cup ring. So that's another team maybe you keep your eye on, with Chris Drury understanding the importance of those heavy centers as playoffs start to get tight late into the playoff season.
It's interesting to look at the two conferences right now. San Jose in the West, not going to be competitive. Anaheim and Chicago, two teams that Frank reported on would be busy today. Chicago has been, Anaheim hasn't. Maybe that's why they could go after a name like Stevenson, why that would maybe make sense. Calgary not exactly aiming to be competitive next year. You can look in the West and kind of see where the divide is between the lower class and the teams who are trying to push. Out East, it is not the same situation at all. I think you look at Montreal, I suppose, as okay, they're kind of still in their rebuild, waiting to move out of it, taking a couple of years. But like, Columbus is getting aggressive here. They went out and gave Monahan term and money. Ottawa's trying to make the playoffs. Jersey's trying to make the playoffs. Buffalo, Pittsburgh, Detroit, Washington, the Islanders still in the mix. There are so many teams out East who are trying to be, or are going to be pushing hard to grab one of those final two spots. Is there one team out of that bunch, Carter, who you're surprised they maybe haven't done more here in the first hour or so? Oh, wait, actually, no. I'm not even going to ask you that because Frank's got news. Frank.
Yeah, Carter, feel free to react to this one. Your old stomping grounds. The Nashville Predators are signing Scott Wedgwood to a 2-year deal. The Wedgewall and Saros backstopping in Smashville. It's a pretty solid tandem for a guy who had a great couple years in Dallas.
Yeah, Frank, I like this immediately. Surprising Dallas letting him go, right? I thought he was a guy, especially this year with Jake Ottinger getting hurt and Wedgewall coming in and playing well. And this is a guy who I was in with Buffalo with him, and I played with him in Arizona. And in Buffalo, he was a number 3, and he was one of those guys, I think, being a world junior goalie and a prospect, he struggled making that adjustment and not really getting the chance to be in right away. We had the same Jordan Newman represented both of us as well. And his game has gotten so good, and he's gone and he's been such a great, he's grown so much as a person in the room. And I think he's going to be a good fit there. He can play a lot of minutes for Saros. He doesn't complain. And for me, that's so important, right? I think something in my role being in that backup category, I think this is a great signing by the Preds and just solidifies the chance of, if Saros needs rest, you have a guy that can go in there and win you games.
Interesting to see Nashville making another dip into the free agent pool. They have been very, very busy. Again, as we wait for more news to come down here, just circling back to sort of maybe what we haven't seen out East. Like, again, Washington, they grabbed that 8 seed last year on a tiebreaker over Detroit, and then they go get super aggressive. I look at a team like the Red Wings right now, and yeah, they brought back Patrick Kane, but that's a team I'm looking at and going, maybe they need to go out and add something a little bit more significant here. Colby, is there anyone out East that you look at and go, a little disappointing with the lack of info here, or lack of moves they made in deadline weekend and here?
Yeah, well, look, I think that's a great call because I think the Yzer plan, I mean, how many years are you going to get before, you start to look at your general manager and have a problem with the results that you're getting? So I think that's a great one. And I didn't even think of that for a team that could possibly look at a guy like Chandler Stevenson. I don't know, Frank, if you want to jump in here, if you got a couple of things that you wanted to talk about. But, I think the New York Rangers have been really quiet today. And I think that's a team that needs to make some moves. I think, they're probably a little bit disappointed with the way that Zibanejad has been in the playoffs over the last couple of years. The reports about Trouba getting moved. Obviously, Vinny Trocheck really stepped up his game in the playoffs this year and became a little more of a household name. But look, it's an arms race. New Jersey made a lot of big moves. They fortified their back end. And right now, I haven't seen Chris Drury really do a whole lot to make me think that his team has improved and they're a team that can then go and get over the hump into the Stanley Cup.
Yeah.
What about you when you look out East? Is there one team? I mean, I think you could also probably circle the Pittsburgh Penguins a little bit in this conversation. Like, they go out and get Hayes and they get paid a second to grab them. But outside of that, it's been quiet.
Yeah, they're kind of in this weird no man's land right now where they're at with, you still have Crosby, you still have Mel, you still have some players there, but they're kind of in this rebuild. Like, they're just not really, what are they going to do, right? They're trying to get into the playoffs. And then when we start talking about the teams that I think when we reflect on last season, we talk about Ottawa, Detroit, Buffalo, these teams that we thought were going to take a step forward, and they never really did. Detroit obviously was close knocking on the door. Buffalo hasn't really done a lot, I don't think. Ottawa obviously going out and getting Linus Ullmark. I think that instantly makes them a much better hockey team when Korpisalo played well and didn't play as well. And I know there's the knock on Linus about the fact of the matter, he's moved around a little bit. And is he going to be able to survive on a team that doesn't have that great of a back end? And this is a goalie that I spent time with in Buffalo when we didn't have a good back end. I went from playing in St. Louis, where we were probably one of the best defensive cores, and I had great numbers at the perfect time to sign my contract in Buffalo. but Linus played very good minutes. He's a .918 career save percentage, and I think he instantly makes this Ottawa Senators team a competitor. So now I think it's an arms race when you start talking about these other teams where it's not really like a divide. You talk about the West, right? Where now it's like, who is actually going to make that step forward, and in Washington keeping their hat in the ring. So there's so many different storylines. So I feel like for me, Buffalo is the team that just hasn't really done a lot today, you know, other than the Zucker signing, you know, where they put them. And they obviously lost a lot of goals. I know Jeff Skinner's a guy that hasn't got to the playoffs in his career, but that still is a lot of goals you got to try to make up somewhere.
Well, what about Carolina? I didn't even think about that, Carter. I mean, I'm looking at Carolina's roster right now on Cap Friendly. They've got an entire 23 out of 23 signed. They've got $17 million in cap space. They've got a new general manager in Eric Tulsky, but Frank has widely reported the structure of the way that management team works with the owner ultimately having the final call on everything. But you know, they walk away from Teravainen. You know, their back end right now, Orlov, they did give a big extension to Jacob Slavin. They still have Burns. They paid Chatfield a little bit, but, you know, Dylan Coughlin, Ronan Seeley, Scott Morrow, are these guys really ready to play in the NHL right away? Kuznetsov is a guy who we know he's an up and down player. We've seen that in his short time there. Excuse me, but that's a lot of cap space to be sitting on for a team that's roster is filled at 23 players.
Yeah, and I think moving on from Teravainen and from Getzel, there's some guys that are, you know, you lose a little bit of punch up front. And what has been the knock the last few years in the playoffs, not being able to get over that hump and find ways to find the back of the net. So again, I think Carolina has to make a move, but it's always that give and take in there with the ownership now. And with Tulsky coming in, a guy who's been in there for a while, who is obviously with the ownership groups. A similar fact of the matter is the way they operate business. It's a different setup where you talk about some teams just throwing their hat in the ring to make try to knock it out of the park, where, you know, maybe he's a bit scarred from the Getzel deal not paying off here.
All right, Colby, Carter, going to set you guys off to the side, give you a chance to catch your breath, and we're going to head out and be joined by 1/3 of our boy Nick Alberga from Leafs Morning Take and Leafs Nation. And Nick, the Toronto Maple Leafs have been pretty busy here in the first little bit of free agency. Obviously, a lot of talk about what they got done before the window opened at noon Eastern time. But as things have gotten going, they've added a few more signings to the mix here. Let's start with OEL. What do you make of that? They give him some term and decent coin. And for OEL, it was a bounce back season in Florida. It's deserved.
Yeah, it's funny. I was like chuckling with a friend just before I came on that Joel Edmondson got more on an AAV and I guess the same type of term as well, as you know, more than Ekman Larson, which I think is kind of fascinating. Like, I think he's an intriguing ad. Obviously, there's the familiarity with Shane Doan, Brad Treliving from his days with Arizona. I think you know, another asset for him is the fact that he can run the power play if they feel like Morgan Riley's better suited for the second unit, so they can sort of jostle with that. If you do recall, the Panthers concluded the season with Ekman Larson running PP1. So I'm just more so curious about the fit. Is he on a 5-6 pairing with a guy like Timothy Liljegren? Is he on the second pairing? But all in all, I think it's a pretty decent piece of business. I probably believe in Ekman Larson a bit more than most people. I thought he had a really strong second half. And I thought he was really good in the postseason, specifically, as you know, Tyler, in the Stanley Cup final. I thought he was much more physical than I've ever seen Oliver Ekman Larson. And I think he's got a lot of confidence to his game right now.
So is this Leafs blue line good enough now, in your opinion? Because you look, Riley, Tanev, OEL, Liljegren, McCabe, and then, I mean, even a guy like Simone Benoit had himself a really solid season, I thought, in terms of what he was earning and what he brought. Is this blue line enough for you?
I think it's better. In short, it's better. Long term, I don't think it is good enough just yet. But I think they're headed in the right direction. I think Chris Tanev is fascinating for so many reasons. I love the way he plays the game, but to give him a 6-year contract when he does, in fact, play so heavy and so hard that he gets hurt or banged up a lot, like he leaves the game like 5 or 6 times a game, and that's just the player they're getting. But I think come the postseason, you know, granted he's healthy, I think he's going to be a big-time boost to this team. But I do think they have taken a step in the right direction in terms of solidifying the blue line. So a vote of confidence for me, Tyler.
Before I ask you my next one, we got a quick one up from Frank in the Insider Cam. Frank, what do you got?
Yeah, so we've been talking about the game of goaltending musical chairs. As it continues to spin, we continue to get more clarity. So I had reported Scott Wedgwood going to the Nashville Predators on a 2-year deal. Well, the guy going to replace him comes from Vancouver. and that is Casey DeSmith is going to the Dallas Stars. He gets some term, 3-year deal at $1 million per year. So the Dallas Stars are set deep in the heart of Texas with Jake Ottinger and Casey DeSmith in goal.
Perfect. And we'll get Carter's thoughts on that in just a second. Last area I wanted to hit on with you when it comes to the Toronto Maple Leafs is obviously up front now. When you look, Max Domi comes back on that 4-year deal. They have 11 forwards under contract. They only have, according to their cap friendly, $700,000 in cap space as well. I know they could maybe move some things around there because they got some extra pieces on the roster. Do you anticipate anything big when it comes to the forward group, or do you think it's run it back time and maybe address something in season if you need to?
Tyler, I hope something big's coming. I can tell you Vegas and the New York Rangers still waiting for something from those two teams. Maybe, again, I'm always careful to make a proclamation on July 1, but this leads me to believe that they feel confident enough that one or both Fraser Minton and Easton Cowan are going to crack this roster at a training camp, because to me, obviously, there's a substantial hole when you lose Tyler Bertuzzi. I get why they didn't bring him back. I like Max Domi coming back, but I think if I had to handicap things, I think the Leafs will add at least one more forward. Maybe it's a value buy. We all know where you're going with that question. I don't know. If it were to me, I would be trying to make that Mitch Marner trade. But again, as teams continue to eat up money today, I think it becomes harder and harder. So I do think they add another forward at some point in time.
All right, we are in hour 3 of our daily Face-Off live free agent special. Nick, appreciate you popping on again, man. Enjoy the rest of free agency.
My pleasure.
There you go. Nick Alberga, one half of Leafs Morning Take with Jay Rosehill. It's not with Frank Seravalli. Speaking of which, though, Frank, if you got a second, I'd love to bring you on and talk about a few maybe bigger picture things here. As I know you are busy, you are breaking news, and we are going to talk with Carter Hutton about the goalie market in just a second here. But earlier today, before things kicked off, we got the Jacob Slavin extension out in Carolina. Are there some other players that you're kind of on extension watch for right now?
Yeah, and look, I don't know that any of these are going to get done today, but certainly keeping an eye on Sidney Crosby and the Pittsburgh Penguins. He's eligible to sign a new deal. I don't think that's happening today. I'm going to throw you 2 other ones that are just haven't received as much buzz, but are still important nonetheless. What about Quentin Byfield and the LA Kings? Where does that deal end up? He's a restricted free agent, needs a new contract, massive season, 50-point season for a guy who took an enormous step and is a big part of their future. My guess is when it's all said and done, that ends up not being a short-term deal, not a long-term deal, but somewhere potentially in the middle. And then one more as we continue to talk and we do East Roundtable, Arpon Basu has been in and out. I'm fascinated to see what happens with Uri Slavkovsky, if I could get his name out. He's another guy, 50-point season for the Montreal Canadiens, really blossomed in a big way, especially in the second half of the year. Is there something to be done there as he enters the final year of his entry-level deal? Will the Montreal Canadiens get ahead of it? Those are just 3 of the names that I'm watching on the extension front.
You mentioned Sidney Crosby, maybe not something that gets done today, something that could bleed later into the summer as well. With the Oilers and Draisaitl, same expectation there, right? Like this is a kind of for Edmonton, take care of a bunch of other business first and then hire a GM, and then maybe third on the docket is the Draisaitl extension.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to take a little bit of time, and not because there's any issues or hangups. It's really just because of what you just mentioned. The Oilers don't want to just hand their next general manager, even though he'd probably like to have it done already and one less thing to sweat about. They're not just going to hand him a new massive contract for Leon Draisaitl and say, hey, now you got to make the rest of it work. And on Draisaitl's end, this isn't really just a one-party conversation. We know that his best friend is Connor McDavid. He's waxed poetic about playing with the best player in the world. There's only one place he can do that, and that's in Edmonton. So the 2 of them are going to be having long conversations, I'm sure, this summer as Draisaitl now spends his offseason in Ontario near McDavid, that, hey, I'm going to sign this summer for this. You're going to sign next summer for this. That's basically where they're at, is they're going to be talking, for a while about this.
And then last one quickly before I let you get back to breaking signings. Chandler Stevenson is the lone name in your top 10 unsigned. Are there any teams to keep an eye on there, or is the market pretty wide open?
There's one team I have in mind. I think the Nashville Predators were one team that was in the mix, but I've had my eye on another team out west. I'm not prepared to say just yet.
Okay. So
if you wanted some details on Scott Wedgwood, I'm sure Carter Hutton is horny. It's 2 years times $1.5 million in Nashville for Scott Wedgwood.
2 years times 1.5 there, 3x1 for DeSmith in Dallas, who takes Wedgwood's job there, Wedgwood's spot on the roster. Speaking of Carter Hutton, let's get back to our main panel with Hutz and Colby. And yes, Carter, we will talk about the backup goalies. Calm down. You're jittery behind the scenes. You're clamoring. What do you make of these two moves here?
No, I'm glad Frank added that at the end because I was trying to find the contract for Wedgwood. And this is just a perfect example of them valuing the extra $500,000 as we can move on from you. And we get 3 years at $1 million for Casey DeSmith and have that safety of not having that extra cap hit for a backup goalie when they know they have Jake Ottinger. And I think Casey DeSmith going there is a great replacement, right? He's played a lot of good minutes. There's in Pittsburgh there, he played 1 year 36, 1 year 38. He's a career .909 save percentage. He went in this year, and it's not like I necessarily say he wouldn't lose the job during the playoffs there to Sheloves. I think Sheloves just came in, they won, and he kept playing well. And Casey DeSmith is very serviceable, a great goalie. And as for Wedgwood, you know, it's kind of you go to another team where they have security, they have a good team. So for him, it's a smart signing as well, right? He gets his 2 years, he gets a little bit of a raise here. He was on a 2-year, $1 million contract each year. Now he goes up to 1.5, and a guy who's worked his way into this role, right? A guy that, you know, was a good number 3 for a while, bounced around. He came into Arizona when I was there and kind of saved the day. I think we had lost 14 or 16 straight when Wedgwood came in and played solid. So he's been through a lot and a journeyman in that sense, and excited for both these goalies. I think a change of landscape, but two good teams that need solid backups.
Well, Hutz, let me ask you a question because you've brought up Jordan Newman a couple of times, who was my agent as well. We got the Edge Sports Management team working here together on the panel, but he represents Cam Talbot. He represents Casey DeSmith. He represents Scott Wedgwood. He represented you in similar situations. When you all have the same agent, what kind of personal situation does that create? Because you're almost seeing his clients are kind of all swapping in and swapping out for each other. And you're seeing how each player has a different personality and likes something different. One guy might want term over dollar. One guy wants a little bit more money and doesn't mind riding on those 1-year deals. So it's kind of an interesting situation that, you've brought the name up a couple of times. So, I kind of wanted to follow up with you about it.
Yeah, as for Jordan, he kind of fell into my lap in the sense of he was known as the goalie guy, right? He had a lot of goalies, and a guy for me in my career, in my point, I needed someone who could knock down some doors and get me, the opportunity I think I was looking for, and I was deserved at that point. So for him, it's obviously something he has to manage. And I think he does a great job of it. His relationship he builds, it. The fact of the matter is business comes first, and he's going to do best by his players, right? So this is obviously a tricky one, right? Where you have Casey DeSmith who comes in to fill that void in Dallas. And I'm sure this isn't a conversation that just started happening now, right? The writing was on the wall to try to re-sign Wedgwood. And I think Jordan's done a good job of making both. He leaves here today signing 2 backup goalies to good deals and keeping them happy. And as for Cam Talbot, he's at a point in his career where he got to pick where he was going to go and getting the 1-year deal to extend it. But it's definitely he has a lot of juggling of goalies to do. And I think at this point, he brings on clients he wants to have on as well too, right? They do a good job of recruiting and getting guys that are, good hockey people. And I think for Jordan, he's done a great job today finding these guys good new homes.
Handful of players, a whole bunch of them already finding new homes, as I've hit on a couple of times here. A big chunk, 90% of Frank Seravalli's top 10 has found a new place to play. And I think it's pretty much 90%, if not maybe just a hair lower, of the top 20 has already found new homes as well. So we'll continue along with some of the general discussions we've been having as a result of this day. And Colby, we've been talking about out east and this mush of teams. What about the Devils? I mean, they go out and get Markstrom. That's massive because let's be honest, if they had .905 goaltending last year, they're a playoff team. And then they go out today and they add a couple of defensemen to the mix as well. Do you think New Jersey has done enough to push themselves back into the playoff mix?
Absolutely. I really love what Fitzgerald has done. He brings in a little bit of sandpaper on the back end. You get that right shot with Brett Pesce. You bring in a lefty to complement him with Brendan Dillon, who is a mean guy that you don't want to play against over the course of a best of 7. Luke Hughes is a year older. Nemec is a year older. Again, I like it. Even Kovacevic, the trade that they made, he's a big man and he doesn't cost you a lot of money. And I'm looking at this team now. I'm thinking to myself, this is probably a team on paper that can give the Rangers a run for their money now in that Metropolitan Division. You think about these two teams squaring off early in the playoffs if they end up in a 2-3 situation in that division. And, on paper, you got to like what Fitzgerald has done with the help that he's brought in, with the players that are a year older. And now you have that formidable goaltending tandem. Do you have that elite Igor Shesterkin? No, those guys don't really exist. But now you have two guys that can get you there. So I really like the moves that they've made. They still have $6.7 million in cap space, but they do have to sign a couple of players, 2 RFAs in Dawson Mercer and Nolan Foote that they extended qualifying offers to, but those are not expensive deals. So look, maybe they're in the hunt for a guy like Chandler Stevenson to bolster that forward group, to bring a little bit of heaviness to that forward group. But I've been impressed so far. I think you build your teams through your blue line. I think you need goaltending in order to be successful.
Yeah, and I think for me, Colby, on that one, having that pair, just to add on to it, when you have a younger team and the goalies struggle, like, Jack Hughes coming out saying if we get saves, we're going to win games. And you could tell it was rattling them during the year with these younger guys that were struggling. Just having veteran present guy like Jacob Markstrom, Jake Allen in the room is going to do wonders for these guys' confidence, not second guessing their goaltending. Whether, even if you have a bad game, he's going to bounce back. Or these younger guys, when it starts to snowball, it kind of deteriorates the team core and the confidence they have in the goaltending. So I think having those two veteran guys there is going to do wonders for this young core.
That 2-man crew they got there with Allen and Markstrom, it's a top blank goalie duo in the league, Carter.
Ooh, top blank. I would say a top 10, a lower end 9, 10 kind of thing. I think stabilizing. They just don't have that outright star. I think Markstrom still has really good minutes left in him, but I definitely, you talk about Shesterkin, we can Ottinger, Demko. There's a lot of guys that are in a higher category, I would say, but for a combo, definitely a top 10 guys.
Yeah, and again, all they need is just decent goaltending to get themselves into the mix, and a healthy Jack Hughes would help as well, because we kind of forget he was the Hart Trophy favorite at one point earlier in the season before he got injured. So again, moves continuing to come in. We got a couple of things that are brewing right now as we continue to check a bunch of names off of Frank Seravalli's top 75 trade targets board. And before we wrap up the show with Frank as well, let's get right to him here. Frank, what do you got?
Yeah, so this is the last guy in our top 10 that was on the board, and it's Chandler Stevenson. That was the team that I had in mind in the Western Conference. They waffled back and forth. I think this was originally a 6-year times $7 million deal. I believe it's come in now. They've agreed to terms at 7 years times 6.25. So they flip-flop and end up pushing the AAV down for the extra year. Look, Stevenson was highly in demand this round, and certainly a guy that a lot of teams wanted to get their hands on, an all-star with Vegas. And it kind of just leaves you wondering, what is Vegas up to? They say goodbye to Marchessault. They say goodbye to Stevenson. They swing and miss, tried to get Stamkos. I think they were poking around on Patrick Kane. Just trying to think if there's anyone else that I was missing in terms of Vegas, but they've been in the mix on a lot and did not get a lot done. And they've got cap space, and we know that cap space doesn't go to waste in Vegas. So does that open up Vegas for a Mitch Marner play? That's certainly something that I'd be looking at.
Spicy. With LTIR space, $6.8 million is the projection for the Vegas Golden Knights. So you can kind of go through the roster, do a math that, hey, a defenseman maybe goes back the other way. Boy, that's awfully close to Mitch Marner's cap hit. But Vegas, they don't keep the bat on their shoulder, Frank. They come out and they swing hard. And the fact that they haven't connected yet just leaves you wondering if maybe they don't take a big swing at some point here. Thank you to Frank. We'll slide him back up into the insider cam. We are live on the Daily Faceoff YouTube for another 30 minutes here as we sprint towards the end of our show. It's brought to you by Bet365, the largest sports betting platform globally. Whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it is never ordinary at Bet365. Download the app today and enter the promo code DAILY365 to get in on a huge range of markets. Colby, Carter, Chandler Stevenson is going from Vegas to Seattle. So the Kraken continue making their big moves. Is this an overpay, an underpay, or is it just right for Stevenson? Carter, I'll start with you.
You know, I think it's right. I like the idea of them upping the term in sense of bringing the AAV down, especially with that Montour signing. This is a couple big contracts coming in. And I think for the Seattle team now, you're adding a guy who has the pedigree, the playoff experience. And just kind of like I touched on with the Hershey Bears, or you talk about the AHL team for the Seattle Kraken, Coachella Firebirds, 2 years in a row now to the Calder Cup finals. They have some guys there that are ready to make the jump to add a little bit more depth. And again, this is another player that can mentor these guys, can help them, can show them what it's like to be a pro and play, you know, those meaningful minutes in that heavy body that he can across, you know, his playoff run with Vegas. He's been so good with Washington. He's done it year in, year out. So I like this signing a lot. For value, Coes might be able to touch on that a bit more than me, but the fact of the matter is Seattle needed a guy like this, and they needed a little bit more of a player that can get it done in that sense, where I think 2 years ago when they had that playoff run, it almost sped things up the process. Instead of being able to just slowly grow as they build up picks and come into the league, I think it sped them along. And this fan base obviously wants to have a team that can win. They get behind it. So this is an exciting day, I think, for the Seattle Kraken fans and for Stevenson and Montour joining that team.
And now look, you've got Matty Beniers, Jared McCann, and Chandler Stevenson as your first three centers. It pushes Yanni Gourde potentially down to your fourth line. And if we're just talking about centers, that's not a bad four center group right there. I think Yanni Gourde, you know, playing down on that fourth line gives you something. Shane Wright, a guy who, you know, might be one of those Coachella Valley guys that is finally ready to come up to the NHL and be an everyday player. The other interesting thing about Seattle, as I'm sort of toggling screens here and looking, is they have a lot of players that are up in a year. You've got Gourde, who's up in a year. Tanev is up in a year. You've got Larson, who's up in a year. Dumoulin is up in a year. And then there's a whole host of other players up in 2 seasons. So there's going to be a lot of opportunity for Ron Francis to kind of reshape this roster over the next couple of years. Stevenson is the only player that's got more than 3 years left on his contract. There's no guys with 4 years. There's no guys with 5 years other than Montour, I'm sorry, who was obviously signed today as well. But I think you're seeing, okay, these are going to be our two really core pieces, you know, at those 7-year deals, 6 and 7 million. Now, who's going to be part of this long term? Who do we have to move on from? Who are the players that Frank's going to be talking about on trade deadline day, you know, however many months away that is from now. So a lot of opportunity for Ron Francis to kind of reshape the outlook of the future of this team. And I think Stevenson and Montour are two guys that are going to be anchors of that, even though they're both 30 years old.
I also think, too, I just want to add to that, the fact that Baalsma is coming up with the American League team, he's got the pulse of the guys that can come up and make the jump to the NHL, which I think is going to be very important for the Seattle team.
Yeah, and I mean, whatever, my brain's usually in Oiler mode, but I think about when Jay Woodcroft first came up with the Oilers as well mid-season, and it was, hey, a lot of these guys from the American League started to make the jump and started to be really, really impactful, and he knew how to push all the right buttons. He knew which guys he could trust, and I do think there could be a little bit of that here with, like you said, Bylsma making the jump up to Seattle and getting another crack at things here. Carter, Colby, we are going to continue our conversation in a bit. I'm going to be tasking you guys with your winners and losers of the first 2 hours of NHL free agency. But first, we got to take one more stop over with our signing grades and our guy, Matt Larkin from Daily Faceoff. We got 3 more that we want to slap a grade onto, and let's start with the most recent one. Mr. Larkin, Chandler Stevenson goes to the Seattle Kraken as they continue their load up.
Yes, Chandler Stevenson, how you feel on that one, it sort of depends on how you see where the Kraken are in their timeline. It's very similar to what I said about the Brandon Montour signing. Chandler Stevenson, he's really fast. He's the Stanley Cup winner. He can play center or the wing. You can put him anywhere in the top 9. But here in Seattle, it's probably going to be a lot higher in the lineup. Puts a lot of pressure on a guy who To me, his offense has been sort of a bonus. It's not like you can rely on this player to be a 70-point guy. And I understand this is clearly what you had to bid to get him. There was a lot of competition for Chandler Stevenson, but I don't love the fit in Seattle specifically because I still think this is a team that needs to get worse to get better. It doesn't fit for me. So it's a C, even though I like the player on Chandler Stevenson.
Victor Arvidsson is a guy, and I've made this comment a couple of times, but obviously very familiar with the Edmonton Oilers from their Pacific Division battles over the last number of years. He comes to Edmonton, and he was on your value board.
He was. And again, it's just a 2-year deal, $4 million. And yes, we know he's battled some injuries. He had the back surgery. I think he had 2 back surgeries, if I'm not mistaken, only played 18 games this year. But again, 2 years, you're mitigating the risk significantly. And we know Victor Arvidsson can still play, 31 years old. He's fast. He's feisty for a little guy. He's my size out there, but he's still really effective. You can move him up and down that lineup. I think he's someone who you might see get a look on the right wing, whether it's with McDavid or Draisaitl. He's going to be in that top 9. And I just like the fact that it's just 2 years. It's not risky at all. He still has plenty of upside. So it's an A- for me for Victor Arvidsson.
Another name that was on your value board, Matt Roy, winds up in Washington. Give me your grade on Roy. And also, because I think it's such an interesting situation, give me your thoughts on what Washington's doing as a whole here.
Yeah, it sort of ties into my grade. I think Matt Roy, like you said, he was on my all-value board.
Get going, because Frank's got a signing here, and then we'll get back to Matt Roy. Yeah. Frank, what's your signing quickly?
Yeah, another one. Ryan Lomberg is going from the Stanley Cup champion Florida Panthers, getting a big raise. He's agreed to terms on a 2-year deal with the Calgary Flames, 2 years at $2 million per. So pretty big, important, life-changing deal for Ryan Lomberg, an organization that he's also familiar with.
All right. Thank you very much, Frank. Back to Larkin and the trade grades. Matt Roy, Washington.
Yeah, so Matt Roy, obviously he's someone that I like. I think he's one of the most underrated defensive defensemen in the league, and he was really good for the Kings penalty kill. He's a right shot, so I love the fit on most teams. But Washington, it's tough. Yes, okay, you bring in Jacob Chikrin, you bring in Logan Thompson, Pierre-Luc Dubois. They're clearly getting really aggressive. Brian Mack, he's trying to build something here, but I don't know if it really makes sense. It's gone beyond just trying to insulate Ovi and chase the goal record. It's like, okay, wait, no, Washington really thinks it can compete in the Metro. And I don't know if it can. I think you're sort of dooming this franchise to spend many more years in the murky middle. So I don't know. I give Roy a B, even though I think he's going to be really effective for them. And it's going to take a lot of heat off John Carlson, who sort of passed his prime and was doing a lot of heavy lifting there in Washington. So B signing, A player, if that makes sense.
B grade to wrap it up. Larkin, appreciate you popping on throughout today's show and look forward to your continued coverage on Daily Faceoff.
Thanks, buddy. Watch for the winners and losers on Daily Faceoff tonight, coming from yours truly.
Absolutely. And we will also get our winners and losers from Colby, Cohen, and Carter Hutton coming up in just a little bit. But let's wrap up our feature segments for the day because, again, optimism is high on the first day of free agency. Everybody's all excited. Everybody thinks they're getting a slam dunk deal. But a lot of the times it doesn't work out that way, which is why we tasked Matt Larkin with finding us the 5 worst UFA signings of the cap era.
Hello, everybody. Matt Larkin here, managing editor and senior writer at Daily Faceoff. It's time to count down the worst free agent signings of the salary cap era. Some of these are pretty ugly. We're going to start at number 5. It's Jack Campbell. This one's fresh. The wound is fresh here. Edmonton Oilers, 2022, 5 years, $5 million. The Oilers, of course, coming off a conference final run in 2022, trying to get over the hump. And what happens to Soupy? He's not even the starter by the end of that first season. Stuart Skinner takes his job, .888 save percentage, and by the second year of that contract, we have Jack Campbell demoted to the AHL. Bakersfield does not really get much worse than that for a contract result. At number 4, we have a humongous big mistake, Ilya Bryzgalov of the Philadelphia Flyers, 2011, 9-year deal at $5.67 million. He was at the top of his game at the time, but by bringing him in, the Philadelphia Flyers, they gradually push out Sergei Bobrovsky. He ends up winning 2 Vezina trophies with the Columbus Blue Jackets. You get 1 good year, really nice appearance on HBO 24/7 from Bryzgalov. That's pretty much it. He plays 2 of 9 seasons. He ends up getting bought out. It's a compliance buyout, doesn't count against the cap, but they pay him for 14 years. Very disastrous. At number 3 from 2008, it's Wade Redden with the New York Rangers, a 6-year deal at $6.5 million. And when a contract is bad enough that a new rule is created because of it, it's not a great sign. Of course, we know he ends up famously demoted to AHL Hartford, plays 119 games with the farm club. And on the next CBA, there's the Wade Redden rule where teams cannot bury a deal completely and not have them count against the cap. That's how much this deal was a disaster for the New York Rangers. At number 2, Ville Leino with the Buffalo Sabres, 2011, 6-year deal, $4.5 million. And the numbers for poor Mr. Leino here are jaw-dropping. He had 53 points the season before he signed that deal. As a Sabre, 46 total points in 137 games, and he had a 0-goal season in 58 games and eventually bought out of that contract. That one's infamous in Buffalo. Terry Pegula came in guns blazing, and one of his first big deals was a disaster. And number 1, this one hits close to home if you're out here in Toronto. It's David Clarkson, 2013 with the Toronto Maple Leafs. 7-year deal, $5.25 million. He was supposed to be the second coming of Wendell Clark. He grew up idolizing Wendell Clark. It was a disaster from the start. In the preseason, he gets suspended 10 games, leaves the bench, and that sort of sets the precedent for what's to come. Clarkson ends up with 15 goals in 118 games as a Leaf, only gets through a season and a half. Eventually, he's dumped to the Columbus Blue Jackets just for the contract of Nathan Horton, so the Leafs can stash it on LTIR. That one will live in infamy as one of the worst deals and highest profile bad deals in Toronto Maple Leaf history. So those are my 5 worst signings of the salary cap era.
And who will win this year's award for David Clarkson's worst contract? I guess we'll probably have to wait a while to find out, but let's continue along with the Daily Faceoff Live free agent special and take another trip out west to our Nation West panel. We'll be joined by Ken Wiebe of the Winnipeg Free Press, Jeff Patterson from Rinkwide Vancouver and Canucks Army, and of course, Ryan Pike from Flames Nation. Let's start with you, Ryan Pike. What do you make of what the Flames have been up to here? They get Mantha on a 1-year deal. They've been kind of nibbling around the edges. Is this the right approach by Craig Conroy?
Yeah, well, I'd say, they're trying to fill in gaps. We've seen, case in point, Devin Cooley, third string goalie. If one of the guys ahead of him falters, fills in some gaps, has some upside, still pretty young. On the blue line, Jake Bean didn't really find his niche in Columbus or Carolina. Comes back to where he played his junior hockey. His dad is still, I believe, is vice chair of the club. The Flames are very familiar with him on a bunch of different levels, so he kind of fills in a gap for them on the left side. Up front, Mantha adds some size and some goal scoring. Lomberg adds a physical element I think they felt that they lacked. And for a group that at some time sort of, was kind of workmanlike, Lomberg brings a bit of swagger. And from a local standpoint, he began his pro journey in Calgary with the Flames minor league system, and he got his first deal with the Flames. And I don't think Flames fans will be too upset to get back a player that just won a Stanley Cup against Edmonton. So from a lot of different standpoints, I think, there's still a ton of cap and roster flexibility going forward for young guys. But if you're looking for established pros to sort of fill in gaps in the roster, I think Craig Conroy did some nice work.
Let's go out to Winnipeg/Vegas because that's where Ken Wiebe is stuck right now. But Ken, when you look at the lack of activity here from Winnipeg, what is the disappointment level maybe within that organization that they haven't been able to get something done? Or is this just maybe a sign that the plan all along was to, hey, wait out the first wave, maybe attack the second wave?
Yeah, I mean, with history as our guide, there haven't been a ton of big cannonball splashes in Winnipeg on the first day of free agency, but there certainly has been a drain going outward in terms of Sean Monahan getting the 5 times 5.5. I'm guessing the term was the biggest impediment there for Winnipeg in terms of trying to keep him around. Brendan Dillon getting a raise of, modest raise, but a 3-year deal. Yeah, I mean, having only filled, we talked about the needs going in, and just having the backup goalie filled, that certainly isn't checking enough of the boxes for the Winnipeg Jets so far. But yeah, I mean, it's more of a marathon here. And although there are a lot of teams around the Central that got better right now, the Jets are still seemingly lurking in the weeds and being patient. And, they might have to go to the trade route if things don't progress here. Because, I mean, if you're looking at centerman, Barrett Hayton maybe on a buy low kind of candidate, but we'll see. I mean, there's not Alex Wenberg, I think, is another guy they've been linked to in the past, but Chandler Stevenson going to Seattle, that's a big one.
Just quickly before I get to you, J. Pat, Frank, you got something quick?
Yeah, so This is actually related to the West. The Edmonton Oilers are bringing in defenseman Josh Brown on a 3-year deal at $1 million per. The reason why I say it's related to the West is I think a bunch of the teams in this conversation had all been poking around on Josh Brown in recent hours. The Calgary Flames were one of the teams that was certainly had an offer on the table for Brown before he ended up going north. So it's a couple players today alone that the Flames were in on: Victor Arvidsson, Josh Brown, that end up going up Highway 2 to the rival Oilers.
Josh Brown, big physical defenseman. Frank, fair to assume before I let you go that it's the end of Vinny Desharnais in Edmonton then with that Brown signing?
That is correct, yes. Don't know where Vinny Desharnais is going, but his days as an Edmonton Oiler are over.
All right. Interesting stuff there. Edmonton gets big on the blue line. I believe Josh Brown was a former Erie Otter, which ties in well to the Chris Knobloch connection as well. J-Pat, going to give you final word here. And I know Ken kind of mentioned something there about some other teams in the Central that went out and got better. In terms of the West as a whole, when you look at Vancouver standing, Vancouver as it stands right now, are they better than they were at the end of the season? Are you willing to say they've upgraded the roster, or is it more of the same?
Yeah, I'm not sure I can make that proclamation. Both Elias Lindholm and Nikita Zadorov were two of the better playoff performers for the Vancouver Canucks, and those are going to be big holes to fill. But they had to get a scoring winger. They've done that with Jake DeBrusk. What a bizarre day, really, when you think Zadorov and Lindholm end up in Boston, and the Canucks get Danton Heinen, Jake DeBrusk, and Derek Forbort, to basically like a trade here on free agent frenzy. But they also had Kiefer Sherwood. When we're talking about players that are physical and hard to play against, Kiefer Sherwood was 15th in the NHL in hits last season in Nashville, and the Canucks saw firsthand in the opening round of the playoffs that he can be an absolute pain in the butt to play against. I think Rick Tocchet is going to take a liking to him, and it just sort of adds a little bit of grit and ups the don't give a damn kind of quotient on this hockey club. And so, look, I think, again, we've talked about where the Canucks are in their evolution. They got to the second round. They want to find a path forward now. And Kiefer Sherwood was a guy that played a nice role for the Nashville Predators in the playoffs, and now he'll do that here on an attractive, it's a 2-year contract, but affordable dollars. So I don't mind that signing at all, actually, adding a guy like Sherwood to the mix here in Vancouver.
All right, I'm going to go around the horn here. 30 seconds each, boys. Give me your prediction for what the teams will do. Pike, you and the Flames. Give 30 seconds. What do you think they do in the rest of the summer?
Very little. I think they're going to probably look at tinkering around the fringes. I think they will continue to sort of work ahead on some of their 2025 free agents. We just saw Andrew Mangiapane sent to Washington. I think they probably would like to have clarity on Andrei Kuzmenko's future. But beyond that, I think they'll look for value bets. They'll look for teams in cap trouble because they're still technically under the salary floor right now. So I think they'll look to find value where they can.
Ken?
Yeah, I think, Adam Henrique might be a possibility on a shorter term at center for the Jets. And again, the back end has to be improved. We'll see what else. I mentioned Oliver Shillington earlier in the day, but a lot of names sneaking off the board. So wondering if maybe the trade route might be more likely than free agency at this point, but still a long day's work ahead.
Wrapping up with you, J-Pat, prediction for the Canucks remainder of the summer.
Yeah, I think they probably look at adding one more defenseman with NHL pedigree, or at least experience on his resume. I don't think that the defense is a done deal at this point. And there's still a question about what they want to do in goal. Artur Silovs looks like he has earned every opportunity to take a shot at being the backup to Thatcher Demko, but they may want to insulate with a guy that has some NHL games on his resume at that position as well. So I don't expect any more big splashes. We saw the Canucks were willing to make some trades in season. I think that's a path that they would investigate, as the season begins to unfold, if they feel that they've got some areas that they need to address.
Jeff Patterson, Rink-Wide Vancouver Canucks Army, Ryan Pike, FlamesNation.ca, Ken Wiebe from the Winnipeg Free Press, and one half of the Kenny and Rennie Show. Gentlemen, can't thank you enough for hopping on today, and enjoy the rest of your summers. That was our Nation West panel, brought to you by Bet365 as we move towards the final 10 minutes of our show here. Want to thank everybody who's popped on from both our East and West panels. Let's go back to our main panel, though, and do a little winners and losers with Carter and Colby. Gentlemen, again, 18 or 19 of Frank's top 20. I can't count live on the air. I'm not going to try to do it, but a lot of the top 20 has been scooped up and signed. There have been a lot of teams who have eaten up a bulk of those players as well. But let's start with the positives. Boys, Carter, you're winner of the first 2 hours of free agency.
For me, it's got to be the Nashville Predators. I know you're getting Steven Stamkos at 34 years old and a Jonathan Marchessault at 33, but I like the idea of going for it, right? You have a goalie and Saros and some depth. So these signings are good. And then the addition of Wedgwood, I think, is great. And Brady Skych on the back end. These are 4 players that instantly make this team better, especially the fact of they have a good thing going right now with Trotz and Brunette. So I like what the Nashville Predators do there. I'm a little biased, right? I was a Pred, and I want to see this team get pushed over the hump. And at least they threw their hat in the ring today. I'm really excited about it.
Colby, I will get to your winners here in just a brief moment, but it looks like the New York Islanders have broken the news themselves that they're going to be signing Anthony Duclair. So it's a 4-year deal. Lou Lamoriello announces Duclair is going out to the Islanders. Colby, your winners from today in the early stages of free agency. And you can't say Nashville.
Look, I like that Carter took Nashville. I think that's a great pick. But honestly, for me, I think the Chicago Blackhawks deserve a lot of credit for the news and for the signings that they made today, because you look at the players they already have, Connor Bedard, namely. You look at the back end with some of the young talent that's coming up. They just drafted, Artem Levshunov, number 2 overall. But again, Teuvo Teravainen, a guy who started his career in Chicago, you get him on a pretty reasonable deal. You didn't have to give him 6 or 7 years. You didn't have to give him a crazy AAV. Same goes for Tyler Bertuzzi. You gave him a little bit more cushion and you gave him some money. But this is a guy who's going to be hungry to come in and prove that he can play on a top line. He can play with a guy like Connor McDavid. You move down the list. Alec Martinez, Stanley Cup champion, probably was set to retire, but the Chicago Blackhawks give him some money to steady the blue line, steady the group. This is a guy who's seen it all. He's done it all. The LA Kings scoring the game winner against the New York Rangers all those years ago in overtime. Go fast forward to his time with the Vegas Golden Knights. And then as you move on through, Patty Maroon, 3 Stanley Cups. Craig Smith, he's been in this league for a long time. He's going to be a good mentor, but he's a heavy player who's probably looking to reestablish the fact that he can play 3-4 more years in the league. And then you've got Brossoit, who's going to be the perfect teammate to Peter Mrazek, a guy who can come in and play a stretch of games if Mrazek is dealing with those hip and groin issues. And again, they didn't overcommit on term. They didn't overcommit on dollars. They still have flexibility for the future, which is everything that they're looking for in Chicago. So I think Kyle Davidson gets a gold star for his work today for the Blackhawks.
Huts, let's flip the ledger here. And actually, maybe in the name of fairness, Colby, I'll let you go first if you want to take your big loser of the day, as we're officially in the final 10 minutes of our show. Who do you look at? Hey, you can be a loser for either way. You can sit there and go, I don't like the money they spent, or you can say, why hasn't this team done anything?
Well, don't worry. Carter and I were one step ahead of you. We were talking to make sure we didn't have the same team's pick. But look, I'm disappointed in what Steve Yzerman did today. I think that with $25 million in cap space and some of the big names that were out there and available, the fact that they weren't able to lure any of these guys to Detroit to play for that original 6 Detroit Red Wings, that's troubling to me. It sounds like they're not bringing back Shane Gostisbehere. Maybe he's looking at Florida now, being from Florida. They'll need a guy to replace Montour. But, there was a lot of really good names in this free agent class. And the fact that they walked away with only Patrick Kane, I don't know. I mean, are you going to improve on bargain deals now? Is that what's going to get you over the hump into the playoffs?
Yeah, I'm with you. Detroit was going to be my pick before I let you go, Carter. You dumped Jake Wallman, and I had to attach a second-round pick to him in a deal that raised eyebrows around the league. People going like, whoa, you had to pay a second to get rid of that guy? And if you were going to do that, you probably should have had a move locked in and ready to go so you could at least turn to the fan base and go, look, yes, we traded Wallman. We had to attach a second, but look at this guy we got. Look at what we used the money on. And right now, they're just kind of sitting there with their hands empty. I don't quite get it. Hot's your loser of the day.
A couple for me. I think the tires on Buffalo not really getting much done. The Rangers. But for me, it's a Seattle deal. It's a Brandon Montour contract. I think is going to haunt Seattle here for a few years to come. I played with Montour, nothing against him. He's a friend and a good player, and obviously he's earned the right to get that contract, winning a Stanley Cup, taking his team there. But this is a guy who is reckless defensively, and I think with Vince Dunn, another younger guy who plays there, the $7 million for 7 years is a lot of money to tie up in a guy who's not really that great in his own end. He's going to give up some opportunities. And I think the oversight here that me and Coach are talking about a little bit is the fact that Sergei Bobrovsky was there to cover up a lot of these mistakes. Now you're putting a lot of pressure on Philip Grubauer. You're putting a lot of pressure on Joey Daccord. And Grubauer, had a sub 900 save percentage. I think last year was a tale of 2 years for Grubauer. He started very bad, was injured, and Joey Daccord was very good, but these aren't Sergei Bobrovsky. This is a different setup for Montour. It's going to be tough, and I think for Seattle, this might be one of those deals that they look back and hate. I like the Stevenson is a good deal. He's a good player that can go in there, but I think for that 7-year deal, and Jason Botterill is there in the staff. He's dealt with Montour. It's going to be an interesting signing. I hope I'm wrong on this one, but for me, I don't like this one at all.
And stage 2 of the NHL offseason here, you could call it, I guess, stage 3. If the draft is stage 1, this is stage 2, is obviously the trade market as well. And I'm going to pick Frank's brain on this in a couple of seconds here, but he still has a top 4 of his 5 trade targets, with Chychrun obviously on the move to Washington. But there is Marner, there is Necas, there are big names on that trade targets board. Hutz, is there one name on that board from Frank that you look at as maybe the most interesting situation, and maybe a team who you think is facing some pressure to get in on the trade market?
I guess for me, it's got to be the elephant in the room, the Mitch Marner situation, right? And the fact of Toronto, how do they run it back again with this high-powered forward group that seems to not be able to get over the hump and find the back of the net? Adding Tanev, now they have 2 goalies there that can go in and hopefully get something going. So I just think, is Vegas going to make a move? I know there's been a lot of debt. They've made a lot of moves. Is this the fact of the matter that they go for Mitch Marner? Do they make that? And I think at this point, as a Maple Leaf fan or that standpoint, they have to understand that what they have going on right now isn't working. They need to make a change, and they need to find a way to beef up their back end or find guys that can get it done in the playoffs. Like year after year, we look at Florida this year and the way they were built, right? They had guys that could play with depth. So I think Marner is the one for me. It'll be interesting to see where he ends up if he doesn't stay in Toronto.
Colby, I'll come to you next, and kind of the same question. When you look at that top 5 board from Frank Seravalli and some of the names that could be on the move, who's one that stands out, and give me maybe a fit for a guy?
Listen, it's hard not to build off what Carter's talking about. And Frank and I have kind of gone back and forth about this on Daily Faceoff Live on Morning Cup of Hockey. Vegas seems like a team that Marner would be willing to waive to go to just based on who and what they are. But I think this situation is going to drag on, and I think this situation is going to create drama. It's going to create baggage, because if you're the player and you're this close to free agency, why would you waive? Why would you help the Toronto Maple Leafs? Why would you do a sign and trade? Sounds like Frank's got something for us.
We got a quick deal to get to here, Frank.
Yeah, this is interesting. Sources say the New York Rangers have acquired winger Riley Smith from the Pittsburgh Penguins in a trade. Still working on details, but Smith has gone from the Pittsburgh Penguins to the New York Rangers. We knew New York wanted to get up to something today. Didn't have as much success on the free agent market, but maybe Smith as a nice check down option to help that team on the wing really would make some sense, especially with his Stanley Cup pedigree as well.
1 year remaining, $5 million AAV. We'll get back to Frank in a second, but Colby, just to wrap on your thought on the Marner situation.
Yeah, look, I think it's going to drag out. And I think when you're this close to free agency, why would you do a sign and trade, and why would you help your team out? And people say, well, they just won't play him. They'll hurt his value. It's not going to work that way. If he's on their roster, they got to try to get the best out of the guy and move forward. So I just think this situation is much more of a car crash than people are putting it out to be. It's a difficult transition. What team's going to extend him and give him the $12 million a year he's looking for based on the last couple of playoff performances? Who can really even fit that in at this point? So that continues, Tyler, to me, to be the situation that, close your eyes and wake me up when it's over if you're a Toronto Maple Leafs fan, because it's only going to get uglier.
All right, Colby, Carter, enjoy the rest of your Canada Day. Colby, enjoy the rest of your Monday, I suppose. But Hutz, was fantastic having you on all of the shows this year. Really, really appreciate it. Colby, Morning Cup of Hockey still humming throughout the summer?
Yeah, we'll be live tomorrow, our normal time, 9 a.m. This week. And then moving forward, you'll catch us Wednesdays at 9 a.m. Throughout the rest of the summer as we head back towards the regular season. So don't totally bail on us. Come back for 9 a.m. Wednesdays. watch Johnny's social media. He'll promote it and he'll give you all the updates you need. Send him a bunch of DMs. Tell him what an idiot he is if you have a chance. Thanks for having us on today, Tyler. A lot of fun to be with you guys on these big shows and these big events.
Huts, I have one thing I would like from you this summer. I would like one appearance on Oilers Nation every day from some sort of boat or dock area.
I know, no problem. I was looking this morning if I could set up on my pontoon boat down there, but Amal told me my mic might be a little bit windy, so we ended up for the back cabin, hidden away from my kids.
Not bad, not bad. All right, Carter Hutton and Colby Cohen, a couple of former NHLers, appreciate their time today. As we head down into the final 2 minutes of today's show, let's bring on our daily face-off NHL insider, Frank Seravalli, for one last hit. And Frank, let me ask you just real quick the question I asked those guys. Give me a winner, give me someone and a GM who you like what they did. Give me a loser, give me a team who you think maybe today was a bit of a miscalculation.
Well, a winner, I'm going to say, is the Chicago Blackhawks. I love that they were able to support their team, and they're definitely going to be better without really getting into, locked into anything crazy long term. All of their deals are short to medium term, some vets, some proven winners, no one that's going to hurt you. That's the name of the game when you get through free agency. Don't sign something that's going to leave you full of regret later. And I kind of look at a couple teams that signed massive deals today. I don't know, the Seattle Kraken got better, but how much better did they get giving massive deals to Chandler Stevenson and Brandon Montour? I think that's a fair question to ask. And how will those deals age? What kind of production will they have? I think they're really good players, but Stevenson is approaching his mid-30s already. Like, that's a big, big deal. So yeah, that kind of stands out to me. I mean, hard to not like what the Nashville Predators did, a clean sweep of the top 3 players on our top 75. It's kind of outrageous when you think about it. To be able to pry Steven Stamkos out of Tampa Bay. Yes, they gave a little bit more on the AAV, but that team is not only going to be really fun to watch this year, I bet you it's going to be one of the most popular dressing rooms in the league in terms of all the guys that they've assembled there. Ryan O'Reilly, Steven Stamkos, Marcia So is a fan favorite, Brady Shea, Luke Shen, like go up and down their roster. It's all guys that people really like to be around. And so they're building quite an interesting clubhouse there in Nashville. And I wonder what kind of conversation this vaults the Preds into, really, when you think about it. Like, are we going now from playoff team to cup contender category? Or is this going to be a team that, pardon the Preds pun, gets long in the tooth kind of in a hurry? So I think that's also a fair question to ask, given the age of some of the guys that they've signed.
Yeah, and that's a perfect tie-in to the 2025 Stanley Cup odds that we have from our friends over at Bet365. And no doubt the Nashville Predators will be a very sexy pick for a lot of people here as you get a look at those live odds, still getting the Predators at around 20-1. And I would not be surprised if some public money doesn't push them a little bit, maybe even into the top 10 as they currently sit at 13. The Oilers, Stars, and Panthers and Devils are your top 4, all coming in at 9-1. Once again, shout out to our presenting sponsor today, Bet365. Frank, let me wrap this up as we wrap up the year here on Daily Faceoff Live with one more just about your trade targets board. It's my favorite thing that we do. The top 5 names on your board that haven't moved yet: Marner, Necas, Ehlers, Line, and then you would have to go down to Trouba as the next one, with Chychrun obviously being on the move to Washington. Out of those 5, and we'll actually push Marner off to the side because we've talked about it enough. Out of those next 4, I suppose, which one do you think we could see a resolution to the earliest?
Probably Marty Necas. I wonder, though, if the Canes now circle back to Necas, since they didn't spend a ton of money and obviously didn't keep many of their guys. Big hits with Pesce, Shea, and Jake Gensel all gone. Does that mean you try and bring back Necas? I think a fair question to ask. I'm real curious about Trouba. Today, like right about now, is waivers time. So there was lots of speculation that Trouba might be a guy that ends up on waivers if they couldn't get the no trade list to cooperate. They did that with Barclay Goodrow. So much happening. So yeah. And then what happens with Mitch Marner? It kind of feels to me, and I'm sure to a lot of observers, the Vegas Golden Knights never back down. They never quit. You didn't get Stamkos, you didn't keep Marchessault, you didn't keep Stevenson. Does that mean you're now targeting Mitch Marner?
Fascinating stuff. That is a wrap, not just on our Daily Faceoff Live free agency special for 2024, but our year of shows here on Daily Faceoff Live. To everyone who is in the YouTube, not just today on our flagship shows like free agency and trade deadline, but for all 200 and some shows that we do Monday and Friday throughout the year. The show grew an incredible amount over this hockey season. And Frank, it was a ton of fun sitting down with you at noon Eastern time every day and rattling through the biggest stories in hockey. It really was an unbelievable year in the NHL, and it was a blast getting to cover it with you.
Yeah, no doubt. I'm really appreciative to all the fans that watch on a daily basis to be able to do this and really kind of provide you as we build out our Daily Faceoff and Nation Network world, nonstop coverage, 24/7, everything you want from morning until night. Any kind of hockey fan you are, whether you're a fantasy hockey player, whether you are a gambler, someone interested in lines and lineups, breaking news, analysis, breakdowns from our friend John Goyens. Certainly no shortage, and got to give a big thanks to everyone behind the scenes that helps make a day like this successful, from Amal Delich, our head of production, to Aaron Bordato and Pat Puff on the production side. We have a tremendous graphics team, Maddie, Eric, the whole crew that do such a great job all year long that really help us and put us in a great spot to succeed. Great leadership at the top of our team with Jay Downton and Mike Gagnon, and just a whole crew that have done a fantastic job with everything behind the scenes at Daily Faceoff.
And everyone who swung on today on the show, whether it was Matt Larkin, our Nation East panel with Nick Alberga, Brent Wallace, and Arpin Basu out west with Jeff Patterson, Ryan Pike, and Ken Weeb, and of course my guy Liam Horban, who made sure they all popped on the show right when they were supposed to as our director today. There were a lot of moving parts, but it was fun to sit here and chat with you all for the last 3 hours and for this entire season. But I think I speak for Frank Seravalli and myself when I say I'm pretty happy it's summertime. So hockey fans, enjoy the rest of your summer. Keep it locked on the Daily Faceoff YouTube. We'll have some summer content coming as news breaks over the next couple of months. But signing off for Daily Faceoff Live for the 2023-24 season. For Frank Seravalli, I'm Tyler Yaremchuk. Enjoy your summer, hockey fans. What's up, hockey fans? If you enjoyed that video, then you're going to want to hit the subscribe button to not miss any of our content, from daily live shows with Frank Seravalli to analysis from former NHLers to exclusive interviews with some of the biggest names in the hockey world on Frankly Speaking. You're going to want to hit that subscribe button and stay up to date with everything going on in the hockey world.